Hey there, tonight we're diving into the chilly depths of a Viking longship's Yule celebration, where the truth is, instead of cozy carols and gifts, there were blustery seas, animal sacrifices, and survival rituals. What you're about to discover may just shatter the myth of the merry marauder. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. Ever tried hauling a whole tree into your living room during the holiday season? Sounds like a scene from a particularly enthusiastic lumberjack's Christmas special, doesn't it? Yet, this was just another day in the life of a Viking celebrating Yule. Before you start picturing a cozy Scandinavian winter wonderland, let's smash a few stereotypes. The Vikings weren't exactly sipping mulled mead by the fireside while darning fluffy reindeer sweaters. No, they were more likely battling frostbite and hunger while invoking Odin for an ounce of warmth. First, let's lay down the historical groundwork. Yule, or as the Norse called it, Jarl, was initially a celebration of the winter solstice. That's the shortest day and longest night of the year, or as Vikings might have said, an excellent opportunity to party while we still have the energy. Astronomically speaking, the solstice occurs when the Earth's poles are at their maximum tilt away from the sun. In the northern hemisphere, that's around December 21st or 22nd. The Vikings, with their keen eye for celestial events, knew this was when the days would finally start to get longer again. Good news when you're living in a place where daylight is more scarce than gold. Now, about that infamous Yule log. This wasn't just a cute little fireplace accessory. The Vikings would drag a whole tree into their longhouse and set it ablaze. No half measures here. Why go through the trouble of hauling a giant piece of timber? Well, partly for warmth. Because let's face it, a Viking winter was colder than a polar bear's nose. But this wasn't just about keeping toes toasty. The Yule log was a symbol of life and light, a beacon of hope in the darkest time of the year. It was burned for 12 days straight, each day marking a victory over the encroaching shadows. Talk about a hardcore version of a Christmas countdown. But don't be fooled into thinking this was all about warmth and light. The real deal behind Yule was sacrifice and survival. The Vikings weren't just fighting against nature, they were trying to appease it. Sacrificial offerings were made to the gods, with Odin leading the celestial guest list to ensure the survival of their communities. Animals, and sometimes even humans, were offered to curry favor with the divine. It was a stark reminder that life was as much about placating the whims of the gods as it was about enjoying the fruits of the earth. The long, dark winters were no joke. Imagine trying to keep your spirits up when daylight is a mere rumor. The Vikings, ever practical, also saw Yule as a time to assess their resources. Food stores were counted, and livestock was culled to ensure that the herd wouldn't outpace the available fodder. It was a time of grim calculus, where the needs of the many often outweighed the life of an individual animal, or, in some cases, a person. This wasn't the romantic, gift-giving holiday we know today. It was a cold, hard fight for survival. And yet, despite the harsh reality, Yule was a time of community and camaraderie. The longhouses would be filled with the sound of storytelling and song, as people gathered to share what little warmth they could muster. Mead flowed like water, and tales of gods and heroes filled the smoky air. In these moments, the Vikings were not just surviving, they were building the barns that would see them through until spring. It's a bit like the modern office holiday party, except instead of awkward small talk and questionable dance moves, you had epic sagas and the occasional brawl. So, while the modern world might picture Vikings as horned-helmeted brutes who spent their holidays in endless feasting, reality paints a different picture. Yes, the Vikings were fierce warriors, but they were also deeply connected to the rhythms of the earth and the heavens. They understood that Yule was not just a time to celebrate. It was a time to reflect on their place in the cosmos and to ensure their survival in the harshest of conditions. As we delve deeper into the Viking world, remember that these were people who lived on the edge, both geographically and existentially. And as they huddled by the fire, watching that great Yule log burn, they were declaring, in their own indomitable way, that they would endure. As the Vikings huddled by their roaring Yule log, declaring their gritty determination to endure, let's take a closer look at the economic gymnastics that made their festive season tick. You see, hosting a Viking Yule feast wasn't a simple case of tossing a few steaks on the grill and calling it a day. No, it was more like coordinating an ancient version of a Michelin-starred pop-up restaurant with all the logistical headaches to match. First up, let's talk about mead. Forget your artisanal craft beer. In Viking times, mead was the king of the castle. It wasn't just a drink, it was liquid gold. Made from fermented honey, water, and sometimes fruits or spices, mead was both a staple and a luxury. Honey wasn't exactly raining from the sky in Scandinavia, so producing mead required a sizable quantity of this sweet nectar. In a world where a successful harvest was the difference between a hardy Yule and a winter of gnawing on frostbitten fingers, honey was precious. And if you wanted to impress your guests, or perhaps your local chieftain, a horn of mead was the way to their hearts. Now, when it came to the actual blowout feast, Vikings weren't just munching on whatever happened to wander past their longhouse. Hosting a proper Yule feast meant pulling out all the stops. Think livestock slaughtered for the occasion, not just for practical reasons, but as a symbol of abundance and hospitality. The cost, considerable. A single ox could be worth the same as a small farm, and a decent-sized pig or goat wasn't exactly pocket change either. Sacrificing these animals wasn't just about making a good impression. It was about ensuring that the guards didn't leave you high and dry when spring rolled around. Let's not forget the trade routes, those ancient highways of commerce that connected the Norse world far beyond the icy fjords. Vikings were expert traders, and their longships weren't just for raiding and pillaging. They were the Viking equivalent of Amazon's delivery trucks, albeit with fewer smile logos and more dragon heads. From the Mediterranean to the Middle East, these seafaring entrepreneurs imported spices, silks, wine, and even exotic fruits. During Yule, a feast might feature goods that had traveled hundreds, if not thousands, of miles. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka, anyone. Or perhaps some Byzantine silks to liven up the longhouse. This ability to trade and import meant the feast tables groaned not just under the weight of local fare, but with the splendor of distant lands. Yet these luxuries came at a price. A single pound of cinnamon could cost as much as a slave, and silk was often worth its weight in silver. It took savvy negotiation skills and a fair bit of luck to ensure these exotic items made it safely back to Viking shores. Speaking of luck, let's talk about the harvest. Picture a Viking farmer anxiously eyeing their crops as the days grow shorter and the nights longer. The success or failure of the harvest dictated whether the Yule celebrations would be a time of joyous abundance or a grim reminder of scarcity. A bumper crop meant full bellies and a hopeful start to the new year. A poor harvest, on the other hand, could spell disaster. It was a game of chance, played out against the backdrop of a climate as unpredictable as Thor's temper. Amidst all this economic juggling, social dynamics were at play too. Yule was more than just a time to eat, drink, and pretend to be merry. It was a stage for social maneuvering, where alliances were forged and rivalries simmered under the surface. Hosting a lavish feast wasn't just about showing off your wealth. It was about political clout. The more impressive the spread, the more respect you commanded. And in the Viking world, respect was as crucial as any weapon in your arsenal. Yet, behind the grand gestures and the flowing mead lay a web of obligations. Guests were expected to reciprocate in kind, creating a cycle of generosity that bound the community together. It was a high-stakes social game, where keeping up appearances could mean the difference between being a respected leader and a forgotten has-been. In a world where survival often depended on the strength of your alliances, Yule was as much about strategy as it was about celebration. So, while it might be tempting to picture the Vikings simply as merry revelers, with a penchant for mead and merrymaking, the reality was far more complex. Their Yule celebrations were a delicate dance of economic savvy, social strategy, and sheer endurance. As the Yule log burned brightly in the longhouse, casting flickering shadows on faces etched with the lines of hard-won survival, the Vikings were living proof that even in the darkest winters, there was light to be found in community and tradition. But don't get too comfortable by that warm fire just yet. There's plenty more to explore as we continue to unravel the tapestry of Viking Yule. As the Yule logs' shadows danced across the longhouse walls, let's wade into the bloodier side of Viking celebrations, those infamous sacrifices. Now, before you think of Vikings as axe-wielding maniacs with an unhealthy fondness for ritual slaughter, hold your reindeer. There's more to this than meets the eye. Sure, the rituals were gory, but they were also deeply rooted in the Vikings' understanding of life, death, and everything in between. Animal sacrifices during Yule weren't just about appeasing the gods with a meaty feast. They were cosmic conversations, a way of speaking directly to the divine. Cows, horses, and the occasional goat were the usual suspects, but the stakes were high, literally. A horse, for example, wasn't just a noble steed. It was a symbol of wealth and status, often worth its weight in silver. Sacrificing such a prized possession was a statement as bold as a Viking longship's prow slicing through ice-cold waters. So why all the bloodshed? Well, in a world where Mother Nature was as temperamental as a toddler on a sugar crash, keeping the gods on your side was kind of a big deal. Sacrifices were believed to ensure a bountiful harvest, favorable weather, and protection from misfortune. Think of it as an insurance policy, albeit one with a distinctly visceral premium. But it wasn't just about asking for help. It was also about showing gratitude. The Vikings recognized that life was a gift from the gods, and sacrifices were a way to say thanks for not letting us freeze to death this winter. These offerings, in turn, reinforced the social fabric of Viking society. They were public events, drawing the community together in a shared act of devotion and trust. After all, nothing builds bonds like watching a ceremonial horse sacrifice. Right. Now, let's touch on human sacrifice, because who doesn't love a bit of macabre history with their holiday cheer? While not as common as animal offerings, human sacrifices did occur, although they were generally reserved for times of extreme crisis, like famine or war. And no, the Vikings weren't plucking random passers-by off the streets for these rituals. The chosen ones were often prisoners of war or slaves, individuals already on the fringes of society. Harsh, yes, but in a world where survival was a constant struggle, these grim choices were sometimes deemed necessary. These acts were political as much as they were spiritual. Sacrifices were statements of power, a way for chieftains to flex their divine favor like a bodybuilder showing off their biceps. By orchestrating these grand displays, leaders reinforced their status as intermediaries between the mortal realm and the divine. It was like saying, hey, Odin's got my back, and so should you. This divine endorsement was crucial in a society where authority could be as fleeting as a summer day in Scandinavia. But hold on, before you start painting all Vikings with the same blood-red brush, let's bust a myth or two. The image of the Viking as a relentless warrior, forever snarling and swinging axes, is only half the story. Sure, they were fierce, but they were also incredibly spiritual, with a worldview as rich and complex as a tapestry woven by the Norns themselves. The Norse pantheon was a vibrant mix of gods and goddesses, each with their own quirks and qualities. Odin, the one-eyed All-Father, was the god of wisdom, war, and poetry, an eclectic resume if ever there was one. Meanwhile, Thor, with his mighty hammer, was the protector of mankind, a kind of divine bouncer against the chaos of the world. And Freyja, goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, added a touch of grace to the pantheon. These deities weren't just celestial overlords. They were part of the fabric of everyday life, guiding, inspiring, and sometimes downright meddling. Vikings lived in a world where the spiritual and the mundane were intertwined like the strands of a finely braided beard. Their rituals and sacrifices reflected a deep reverence for the unseen forces that shaped their world. Life was unpredictable, harsh, and often brutally short, and these spiritual practices offered a sense of order and understanding amidst the chaos. So, while the Viking warrior may have been a fearsome sight on the battlefield, they were also philosophers, poets, and priests. They pondered the mysteries of the universe, sought wisdom in the runes, and crafted stories that still capture our imagination today. They understood that strength and spirituality weren't mutually exclusive, but rather two sides of the same rune-carved coin. As we ponder these ancient rituals, it's worth remembering that the Vikings were navigating a world vastly different from our own. Their sacrifices and ceremonies, though alien to us, were vital threads in the tapestry of their existence. They remind us that beneath the helmets and chainmail, the Vikings were human, grappling with the same questions and uncertainties that we face today. And as the Yule celebrations carried on, with the sound of laughter mingling with the crackle of the fire, the Vikings were doing what all humans do, seeking connection, meaning, and a bit of divine favor to see them through the long, dark nights. But don't pack away your historical curiosity just yet. There's more to explore in the Viking saga, and the tale is far from over. As the Yule festivities unfolded among the Vikings, the Longship was more than just a vessel. It was the lifeline of their seafaring society. Picture it, a sleek, wooden dragon slicing through the icy waters, carrying not just warriors, but the very essence of Viking culture. These longships weren't just about getting from A to B. They were mobile fortresses of power, packed with men who had more in common with a pack of wolves than a disciplined military unit. And keeping this rowdy crew from mutiny midwinter was a task worthy of Odin himself. Now, let's dive into the social and political games played on these maritime marvels during Yule. Viking leaders, savvy as any political strategist, knew that the key to maintaining control was to ensure their crew's loyalty didn't wane like the winter sun. Yule was less about decking the halls and more about reinforcing bonds, both personal and political. Imagine a chieftain standing before his men, his voice rising above the howling wind and creaking timber. He wasn't just leading chants or pouring out mead. He was weaving a web of loyalty. Every cup raised, every tale told was a thread in a tapestry of allegiance. The leaders knew that a well-told story could be as powerful as the sharpest sword, binding men together with shared history and common purpose. But it wasn't all just talk. There was a very real economic motive at play here. Think of Yule as the Viking version of a corporate team-building retreat, minus the trust falls and PowerPoint presentations. A well-fed, entertained crew was less likely to start eyeing the horizon with thoughts of greener pastures, or worse, plotting a coup. The stakes were higher than a masthead in a storm, and leaders had to balance the scales of generosity and authority with all the finesse of a juggler at sea. Speaking of feasting, let's talk numbers, because who doesn't love a good stat with their history? A Viking longship, depending on its size, could carry around 60 to 80 men. That's a lot of mouths to feed when the nearest supermarket is a few centuries away. Leaders had to ensure that supplies were plentiful, not just for survival, but to keep morale afloat. A typical Yule feast might include vast quantities of meat, perhaps a dozen sheep or several pigs, washed down with gallons of mead. Each sip and bite was a reminder of the leader's ability to provide, a tangible display of power and prosperity. And while we're on the subject, let's debunk the myth of the ever-gallant Viking leader. Sure, they were charismatic, but they were also shrewd, even ruthless. A leader's role during Yule wasn't just to play the benevolent host, but to subtly remind the crew of their dependence. It was a delicate dance of give and take, where a misstep could lead to you being thrown overboard faster than you could say, Ragnarok. Now, let's steer this ship toward storytelling and music, vital tools in the Viking leader's arsenal. Norse sagas, sung or recited around the flickering glow of a fire, were more than mere entertainment, were lessons wrapped in legend, providing both comfort and cautionary tales. These stories were the Netflix of the Viking world, binge-worthy narratives that educated and enthralled, instilling values and reinforcing cultural norms. Music, too, played its part. The sound of a lyre or the rhythmic beat of a drum could stir the soul and soothe the restless spirit. It was a way to unify the crew, to remind them of their shared identity and purpose. In the darkest days of winter, when the world seemed nothing more than an endless expanse of night, these melodies were a lifeline, a reminder that, together, they could endure. The political significance of Yule aboard a Viking longship cannot be overstated. Forging alliances wasn't just a matter of shaking hands or exchanging pleasantries. It was a calculated gamble, where the stakes were as high as the North Sea waves. A well-placed marriage proposal during Yule could secure alliances, while a subtle word in the right ear might avert a brewing feud. Leaders used Yule as a stage, where every decision was watched with the scrutiny of a hawk. One wrong move, and the whole house of cards could come tumbling down. And then there were the power plays, the chessboard maneuvers that could make or break a leader. Gifts were given, not out of pure generosity, but as strategic investments. A well-timed gift could sway loyalty, while a slight or omission could spark a vendetta. It was a high-stakes game of diplomacy, where every action had a ripple effect that could last long after the Yule fires had burned out. So, what's the takeaway from this saga of seafaring strategy? Simply put, Yule aboard a Viking longship was a masterclass in leadership, a lesson in maintaining power through both fear and favor. The leaders knew that their survival depended not just on their prowess in battle, but on their ability to navigate the complex waters of human relationships. It was a balancing act, a dance on the edge of a knife, where every decision was a calculated risk. And while the romantic image of the Viking as a fearless marauder has its appeal, the reality was that these men were also diplomats, negotiators, and storytellers. They understood that true power lay not just in strength, but in the bonds of loyalty and the shared belief in something greater than themselves. As the Yule celebrations continued, with stories flowing as freely as the mead, the Vikings were crafting a legacy that would echo across the ages. But don't pack away your curiosity just yet. There's more to explore in this saga of Viking Yule, where every toast and tale brings us closer to understanding these remarkable seafarers. There's a whole world of intrigue and adventure waiting just beyond the horizon, and we're only just beginning to set sail. As we sail into the final leg of our Viking journey, let's unravel how Yule's legacy managed to hitch a ride on the sleigh to modern Christmas. You see, as the Norsemen were busy with their epic sagas and sacrificial ceremonies, a seismic cultural shift was on the horizon. Enter Christianity, with its own set of rituals, and a penchant for absorbing local customs like a sponge in a horn of mead. The transition from the pagan festival of Yule to the Christian celebration of Christmas was less of a hostile takeover and more of an elaborate cultural remix. Now, before you start imagining a Viking Santa on a longship, let's break down what actually happened. The Christianization of Scandinavia, which picked up steam around the 10th and 11th centuries, was a complex process. It wasn't just about swapping out Odin for Jesus. It was a negotiation between old gods and new beliefs. And like any good negotiation, it involved a fair bit of compromise. The church, with a strategic eye on conversion rates, saw the value in repurposing existing festivals. Why reinvent the wheel when you can just slap a new logo on it? Take the Yule log, for example. This wasn't just some random stick of wood to the Vikings. It was a symbol of life, warmth, and the eventual return of light to the world. Fast forward to today, and you'll find its echoes in the Christmas tradition of the Yule log cake. Sure, it's more chocolate and less charred wood now, but the core idea remains, celebrating light amidst the darkness. It's a sweet reminder of how traditions evolve yet stay rooted in their ancient origins. Then there's the Christmas tree, that verdant icon of holiday cheer. Many historians argue its roots can be traced back to pagan rituals that honored evergreens as symbols of eternal life. Vikings didn't exactly haul decorated conifers into their longhouses, but they did revere trees as powerful symbols. The transition from sacred groves to living room centerpieces was a gradual one, with Christians eventually adopting and adapting the practice. The evergreen became a metaphor for Christ's eternal life. And voila, a new tradition was born from the ashes of the old. And let's talk about feasting, because what's a holiday without food comas? While the Vikings were chowing down on roasted hogs and mead, today's holiday tables groan under the weight of similar indulgences. The idea of gathering, feasting, and sharing stories is as old as time, a common thread weaving through both Yule and Christmas. It's a testament to the enduring human desire for connection, warmth, and perhaps a little bit of merry excess. But what about the jolly old elf himself, Santa Claus? Here's where the plot thickens. While the modern Santa owes much to St. Nicholas and a certain soft drink company's advertising genius, there's a whisper of Odin in his DNA. Old Man Winter, with his white beard and sleigh, shares more than a passing resemblance to the Norse god who rode an 8-legged horse across the sky. The transformation from a one-eyed deity to a rosy-cheeked gift-giver is a fascinating case of cultural evolution, where myth and marketing meet in a merry mishmash. Now, let's not gloss over the darker side of this transition. The Christianization process wasn't all mulled wine and mistletoe. It involved a fair bit of coercion, with churches replacing temples and new gods nudging out the old. But despite this, many elements of Yule survive, cleverly camouflaged under a Christian veneer. It's a reminder that while belief systems may change, the core human need to celebrate, to find meaning in the turning of the seasons, remains steadfast. So, why does the legacy of Viking Yule continue to captivate us today? Perhaps it's the romance of a world where the line between myth and reality was as blurred as a winter's horizon. Or maybe it's the visceral appeal of a time when celebrations were raw, communal affairs, grounded in the stark realities of survival. The Vikings understood that life was fleeting, a wild ride on the edge of the known world. Their celebrations, like their lives, were intense, vibrant, and unapologetically bold. In a world where tradition is often wrapped in commercial trappings, the story of Viking Yule offers a glimpse into a time when celebrations were deeply rooted in the cycles of nature and the struggles of daily life. It's a story of continuity and change, of how ancient practices can adapt and endure, even as the world shifts around them. So, the next time you gather around the Christmas tree or savor a slice of Yule log cake, remember that you're partaking in a tradition that stretches back through the centuries, connecting you to a past as wild and wondrous as a Viking saga. And as we draw the curtain on this historical voyage, let's not forget the lesson the Vikings taught us, that even in the darkest winters, there is light to be found. It's a legacy that echoes through the ages, a reminder that the human spirit, like the Yule log, burns brightly against the shadows. So, here's to the Vikings, those fierce seafarers and storytellers, for leaving us a legacy as enduring as the North Star. With that, our journey through the icy waters of Viking history comes to a close, but the echoes of their Yule celebrations continue to resonate in our modern festivities. It's a fascinating chapter in the book of human history, one that reminds us of the power of tradition, the resilience of culture, and the unyielding human desire to find warmth and meaning in the heart of winter. And if that isn't worth a toast of mead, or maybe just a mug of eggnog, I don't know what is. When you think of ancient maritime rock stars, the Phoenicians are the chart-toppers of the Mediterranean mixtape. These folks were the navigational whizzes of the ancient world, sailing the seas like they had GPS, when in reality they were navigating by stars and gut instinct. Picture them as the Elon Musks of 1500 BCE, minus the Twitter drama and electric cars. Instead, they had cedar ships and a knack for trade that would make even the savviest Wall Street broker nod in approval. Originating from what we now call Lebanon, the Phoenicians didn't just stumble upon a good gig, they crafted it. Strategically plopped on the eastern Mediterranean coast, they turned their corner of the world into a bustling hub of commerce. Their homeland was a mere sliver of land, but it packed a punch with its position linking the east and west. Think of it as the Panama Canal of the ancient world. They weren't just middlemen. They were the original Amazon Prime, facilitating the fast and efficient delivery of goods across the Mediterranean. Now, let's talk resources. The Phoenicians were blessed with the legendary cedar forests of Lebanon. These trees were like the oil reserves of their time, precious, coveted, and a little bit magical in how they transformed the Phoenicians into maritime maestros. The cedars were so famous that they got shout-outs in ancient texts, including the Bible. King Solomon himself was said to have used Lebanese cedar to build his temple. Imagine that, a tree so iconic it made it into the best-selling book of all time. With these majestic timbers, the Phoenicians built ships that were not only sturdy, but also swift. They were the speed demons of the sea lanes, creating the first maritime superhighways that connected distant lands. These ships weren't just for show. They were the backbone of an economic empire. By 1200 BCE, the Phoenicians had crafted a trading network that spanned the Mediterranean, reaching as far as Spain and North Africa. Their ships carried everything from the mundane, like grain and olive oil, to the luxurious, including the famous Tyrian purple dye, extracted laboriously from sea snails. A luxury so sought after, it was the ancient equivalent of Gucci. Now, a little myth-busting. The romanticized image of the Phoenicians as peaceful traders is only half the story. Sure, they were skilled merchants, but they were also shrewd operators. Their success wasn't merely due to luck or good geography. The Phoenicians were savvy in exploiting political turmoil to their advantage. They thrived amid the power vacuums left by the fall of great empires, such as the Egyptians and the Hittites. When big players stumbled, the Phoenicians danced in and took over the markets. Their trade networks were not just about goods. They were conduits for ideas, technologies, and cultures. The Phoenicians spread the alphabet, a nifty little invention that revolutionized communication and commerce. Imagine trying to conduct trade negotiations with hieroglyphs or cuneiform. The alphabet was the business card of the ancient world, a tool that streamlined and simplified massive economic networks. It's no wonder they were known as the carriers of civilization. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was no golden age of free and fair trade. The Phoenicians were as cutthroat as they come. Their monopoly on certain trade routes and goods meant they could dictate prices and terms. They were the original cartel, controlling the flow of goods with an iron grip. If you wanted the finest goods the ancient world had to offer, you played by Phoenician rules, or you didn't play at all. In many ways, the Phoenicians were the unsung heroes of antiquity, overshadowed by the more militaristic empires that followed. But their legacy is undeniable. They carved out a niche in history not through conquest, but through commerce and navigation. They were the silent architects of a connected Mediterranean world, the invisible hand that tied ancient economies together. So, as you tuck into bed tonight, remember the Phoenicians. Consider the cedar ships slicing through the waves, laden with treasures and ideas that would shape the course of history. These were the true masters of the sea, the savvy sailors who turned the Mediterranean into their personal marketplace. In a world that often glorifies conquerors and kings, let's tip our hats to the traders and navigators who truly changed the world. Yet, for all their mastery of the waves, the Phoenicians weren't just content to float around the Mediterranean like aimless wanderers. They had business to conduct, serious business. These navigational savants engineered a trade network that was so intricate and far-reaching, it could make modern logistics look like a game of checkers. We're talking about an operation that sprawled from the Levant in the east to the Atlantic Ocean in the west. Their ships were the ancient cargo drones, buzzing across the sea with precision and purpose. So, let's break down this ancient version of global commerce. At the heart of their trade empire was the city-state of Tyre, their crown jewel and the home base for the fabled purple dye. This stuff was the Chanel No. 5 of its day, a luxurious color extracted from the Murex sea snail. It took about 250,000 snails to produce just 1 ounce of dye. Yes, you heard me right, 250,000 sea snails for a mere ounce. Talk about dedication to fashion. Sporting Tyrian purple was a statement, one that screamed wealth and power louder than a Ferrari revving in your driveway. Now, let's take a cruise down one of their primary routes. Setting sail from Tyre, they'd glide past Cyprus, snag a shipment of copper, because every ancient society worth its salt needed copper for weaponry and tools, and then they'd head towards Crete. Here, they'd swap stories and goods with the Minoans, another maritime culture with a penchant for palace complexes and bull-leaping rituals that would make any rodeo look tame. But the Phoenicians weren't just there for the local entertainment. They were dealing in textiles, timber, and the ever-precious metals. From there, the Phoenicians sailed westward to Carthage, their colony in North Africa, which would later become a thorn in Rome's side. Carthage was more than just a pit stop. It was a hub of commerce and culture, nestled in a strategic location that allowed the Phoenicians to control trade between the eastern and western Mediterranean. Think of it as the halfway house of ancient trade, where goods were exchanged and plans were hatched. But this wasn't just a Mediterranean roadshow. The Phoenicians were bold enough to venture beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar, into the Atlantic. They reached as far as the British Isles, collecting tin, which was crucial for making bronze, and gallivanting along the coastlines of Spain and Portugal. The Atlantic trade routes were their playground, and they played with the skill of seasoned professionals. Of course, where there's trade, there's competition, and the Phoenicians were no strangers to the cutthroat nature of ancient commerce. They weren't all smiles and handshakes. They were savvy, strategic, and sometimes downright ruthless. They established monopolies on key goods and trade routes, making sure that if you wanted the best, you had to pay the Phoenician price. And if you dared to undercut them, you better be prepared for some maritime muscle. Piracy was a constant threat, the maritime equivalent of highway robbery. The Phoenicians, ever the pragmatists, had to be prepared for such risks. Their ships were swift, but not just to outrun pirates. They were equipped to defend against them. The Mediterranean was their domain, and they intended to keep it that way. Competition wasn't only external. Even within Phoenician society, city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos were often engaged in a game of one-upmanship. Each city sought dominance in trade, which fostered an environment of innovation and enterprise. This internal rivalry pushed the Phoenicians to refine their craft, creating ships that were the envy of all who set eyes on them. In a time when most people rarely ventured beyond their local village, Phoenician sailors were the intrepid explorers of their age, charting courses that others wouldn't dare. They didn't just hug the coastline, they ventured into the open sea, relying on the stars and their wits. Their journeys were epic, not just in distance, but in the audacity they required. Imagine setting sail without modern navigational tools, trusting your life to the whims of the ocean and the accuracy of your celestial calculations. The Phoenicians were also pioneers in what we might call early capitalism. They understood supply and demand long before Adam Smith penned a word. Their economic strategies were driven by market forces. They manipulated supply to drive up demand. When it came to their monopoly on purple dye, they were the OPEC of the ancient world, controlling the flow and price with shrewd calculation. And let's not forget the cultural exchange that came with their trade. As they moved goods, they also disseminated ideas, technologies, and customs. Through their trade networks, the Phoenicians acted as cultural conduits, spreading the alphabet, which they had refined into a user-friendly script that would eventually evolve into the Greek and Latin alphabets. This was a game-changer in a world where writing was often the domain of an elite few. By democratizing communication, the Phoenicians laid the groundwork for the cultural and economic interconnectedness that would define the Mediterranean world for centuries. If you think about it, their trade networks were the precursor to globalization. They connected disparate cultures and economies, creating a web of relations that transcended borders. They were the unsung architects of an interconnected world long before the internet made it fashionable. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The Phoenicians were in it for the profit, and they were acutely aware of the volatile nature of their business. Political instability could threaten trade routes, and alliances were as fluid as the sea they sailed. They had to be agile, adapting to the ever-changing political landscape of the ancient Mediterranean. So there you have it. The Phoenicians, the masters of the sea, weren't just seafarers. They were visionaries of trade, innovators of their time who understood the power of commerce in shaping the world. Their legacy is one of daring exploration, cultural exchange, and economic prowess, a testament to the enduring impact of their maritime empire. And as we look to the next part of their saga, remember that the Phoenician story is far from over. There's still much more to uncover about these ancient traders who turned the Mediterranean into their personal playground. Stay tuned for the next chapter in their remarkable journey. And speaking of remarkable journeys, let's dive into the Phoenicians' cultural and technological legacy, the kind that would make even Steve Jobs raise an eyebrow. Picture this. You're an ancient trader, trying to haggle over prices with pictographs or cuneiform symbols. It's like playing charades with a stone tablet. Enter the Phoenician alphabet, a sleek, 22-character script that transformed communication like an ancient version of texting. This wasn't just about writing love letters or grocery lists. It was about revolutionizing trade and diplomacy. The Phoenicians were like the Silicon Valley of ancient scripts, crafting a tool that was intuitive, efficient, and oh so viral. It spread faster than a cat meme, influencing the Greeks, who then passed it to the Romans, and voila, your ABCs were born. But the alphabet wasn't the only cultural gift they bestowed upon the world. Let's talk about Carthage, their crown jewel in North Africa, a colony that was less of a quaint outpost and more of an economic powerhouse. Founded around 814 BCE, Carthage became a bustling metropolis, strategically perched to dominate trade between the eastern and western Mediterranean. It was the ancient world's answer to New York City, a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and of course, commerce. Carthage didn't just thrive, it soared, becoming a thorn in the side of Rome. Picture them as the scrappy underdog, challenging the Roman Empire before being squashed like a bug under a sandal in the Punic Wars. But more on that drama in a later episode. For now, let's stick with Carthage's golden days. This city wasn't just a hub of trade, it was a cultural beacon. The Phoenicians were master disseminators, spreading technologies, art, and even religious practices. Their gods and goddesses, like Baal and Astarte, made their rounds across the Mediterranean, influencing local pantheons like a divine guest appearance. And let's not forget the technological innovations. Those cedar ships weren't just pretty, they were state-of-the-art. The Phoenicians introduced the keel, a structural backbone that made their vessels stabler and more seaworthy. It was like strapping a spoiler onto a car for better performance, a small tweak with big results. Their merchant prowess was legendary, allowing them to weave a web of influence that stretched far beyond their borders. They were the original influencers, except instead of Instagram, they used bustling ports and trade routes. Their impact was felt from the sands of Africa to the shores of Spain. This wasn't just about selling goods, it was about spreading ideas, technologies, and culture. The Phoenicians were the ambassadors of antiquity, turning every trade encounter into a cultural exchange. They didn't just bring back goods from their journeys, they brought back stories, customs, and innovations. However, let's not sugarcoat things. Their trade networks weren't all sunshine and rainbows. These were high-stakes operations, fraught with risks from pirates, rival states, and the ever-unpredictable politics of the ancient world. The Phoenicians were like the Wall Street of the Mediterranean, navigating a volatile market with deft precision. Their ability to adapt to changing political landscapes was as crucial as their nautical skills. They played the Game of Thrones long before it was a TV series, forging alliances and rivalries with the same deftness they showed in business. Economically, they were astute. They understood the principles of supply and demand, leveraging their monopolies to drive up prices. Take their famous purple dye. It was practically a license to print money. By controlling the supply chain, from the harvesting of the murex snails to the dye's distribution, they created a luxury brand that was desirable and exclusive. They were the Louis Vuitton of antiquity, with a product so coveted that only the elite could afford to flaunt it. But perhaps their most enduring legacy is their role as cultural connectors. As they sailed the Mediterranean, they did more than exchange goods. They exchanged ideas. They were the bridges between civilizations, facilitating a flow of knowledge that would shape the ancient world. Their alphabet democratized writing, making it accessible to more than just priests and scribes. Their technological innovations made seafaring safer and more efficient, paving the way for future explorers. And their cultural exchanges enriched societies, infusing them with new ideas and practices. In many ways, the Phoenicians were the unsung heroes of cultural globalization. They didn't conquer with swords and spears. They conquered with commerce and communication. Their legacy is a tapestry of interconnectedness, woven with the threads of trade, technology, and culture. They were the original networkers, the linked-in of the ancient world, creating connections that would resonate through the ages. As we wrap up this part of their saga, remember that the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were pioneers, innovators, and cultural ambassadors. They didn't just sail the seas, they shaped the world. Their story is far from over, and there's still much more to uncover about these navigational maestros. So stay tuned as we continue to explore the remarkable journey of the Phoenicians, those masters of the sea and architects of the ancient world. Now, as we sail deeper into the murky waters of Phoenician lore, let's sift through the sand for some golden truths. The Phoenicians have long been cast as the enigmatic magicians of the sea, but were they really swashbuckling adventurers, or just shrewd entrepreneurs who knew how to spin a good yarn? It's time to don our myth-busting hats and dive into the nitty-gritty of their nautical legend. First off, let's tackle the myth of the Phoenicians as mystical seafarers with an uncanny ability to navigate treacherous waters. Sure, they were brilliant navigators, but it wasn't all-star charts and divine intervention. These folks were more like the Steve Jobs of the ancient maritime world. Innovation was their forte. They didn't sail blindly into the night. They used the North Star and other celestial cues like a cosmic compass. Plus, they had the guts of a high-stakes poker player, venturing into the uncharted Atlantic waters while most others clung to the safe embrace of familiar coastlines. Now, here's a juicy tidbit. The Phoenicians were secretive to a fault. Imagine a magician jealously guarding their tricks. These traders weren't about to share their trade secrets and risk competition. Their maps and knowledge of sea routes were closely held treasures, passed down like family heirlooms. This secrecy shrouded them in mystery, adding a layer of intrigue to their already impressive reputation. And speaking of reputations, their image as the original globetrotters is partly due to their knack for marketing. They didn't just sell goods, they sold stories. The Phoenicians understood the allure of the exotic and crafted an image that was as much about mystique as it was about merchandise. When they traded with distant lands, they didn't just bring back products. They brought back tales of far-off places, of lands beyond the horizon, where the sun dipped into the ocean's embrace. But let's not romanticize them into oblivion. The Phoenicians were savvy businessmen through and through. They knew their way around a negotiation table better than most, and they played the market like a fiddle. Take their monopoly on Tyrian purple, for example. By controlling both the production and the narrative, they created demand that was sky-high. This wasn't just a dye. It was a symbol of power and prestige. Wearing it was akin to flashing a platinum credit card. Everyone knew you'd made it. Digging deeper into their trade practices, we uncover a world of economic maneuvering that would make even the most hardened Wall Street trader raise an eyebrow. The Phoenicians had a knack for exploiting political vacuums, stepping into the breach whenever a major empire faltered. This wasn't just opportunism, it was strategic genius. They had an uncanny ability to read the winds of change and adjust their sails accordingly, ensuring their trade networks remained robust and profitable. Their penchant for secrecy wasn't just about safeguarding routes, though. It was a matter of survival. The Mediterranean was a competitive arena, teeming with pirates and rival traders eager to cut in on their action. By keeping their methods and routes under wraps, the Phoenicians maintained their edge in a cutthroat market. It was a high-stakes game that required both wit and wariness. Now, let's take a step back and examine how primary sources have shaped our view of the Phoenicians. Ancient authors like Herodotus and Strabo painted them as intrepid explorers, but these accounts often veered into the fantastical. Even our modern fascination with them, as the original sea guards, stems from these embellished narratives. It's crucial to recognize that historical sources are often colored by the biases and agendas of their authors. In reality, the Phoenician story is a blend of myth and materialism, romance and reality. On the economic front, it's clear that the Phoenicians were more industrialists than adventurers. They were the logistical masterminds of their age, crafting an economic empire that was as efficient as it was expansive. Their trading posts and colonies were strategically placed, not just to facilitate commerce, but to control it. This wasn't just about making money, it was about maintaining a stranglehold on the flow of goods across the Mediterranean. And while we're busting myths, let's address the idea that the Phoenicians were purely peaceful traders. Sure, they preferred commerce to conquest, but they weren't afraid to flex their maritime muscle when necessary. Their ships were designed for speed, yes, but also for defense. They were well armed and ready to fend off threats, an essential feature in a world where piracy was as common as a sunny day in the Sahara. Socially, the Phoenicians were as complex as the trade networks they built. Their society thrived on competition, not just with external rivals, but within their own ranks. City-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos weren't just allies. They were rivals vying for dominance. This internal competition spurred innovation and drove them to continuously improve their maritime technologies and strategies. In essence, the Phoenicians were the ultimate pragmatists, balancing the art of trade with the science of survival. They were the ancient world's answer to today's tech giants, using their resources to craft a legacy that was both influential and enduring. They understood the power of narrative, using it to weave an image that was as much about perception as it was about reality. As we peel back the layers of myth surrounding these enigmatic seafarers, it's clear that the Phoenicians were more than just mystical mariners. They were strategic savants, masters of marketing, and pioneers of trade. Their story is one of calculated risks and cunning strategies, a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. And while their legacy may be cloaked in mystery, it's a mystery worth unraveling, one nautical mile at a time. Stay tuned as we continue this voyage into the world of the Phoenicians, where there's always more beneath the surface than meets the eye. Their tale is far from over, and as we sail into the next chapter, remember this. History is not just about what happened, but about how we choose to remember it. Now, as we sail deeper into the murky waters of Phoenician lore, let's sift through the sand for some golden truths. The Phoenicians have long been cast as the enigmatic magicians of the sea, but were they really swashbuckling adventurers, or just shrewd entrepreneurs who knew how to spin a good yarn? It's time to don our myth-busting hats and dive into the nitty-gritty of their nautical legend. First off, let's tackle the myth of the Phoenicians as mystical seafarers with an uncanny ability to navigate treacherous waters. Sure, they were brilliant navigators, but it wasn't all-star charts and divine intervention. These folks were more like the Steve Jobs of the ancient maritime world. Innovation was their forte. They didn't sail blindly into the night. They used the North Star and other celestial cues like a cosmic compass. Plus, they had the guts of a high-stakes poker player, venturing into the uncharted Atlantic waters while most others clung to the safe embrace of familiar coastlines. Now, here's a juicy tidbit. The Phoenicians were secretive to a fault. Imagine a magician jealously guarding their tricks. These traders weren't about to share their trade secrets and risk competition. Their maps and knowledge of sea routes were closely held treasures, passed down like family heirlooms. This secrecy shrouded them in mystery, adding a layer of intrigue to their already impressive reputation. And speaking of reputations, their image as the original globetrotters is partly due to their knack for marketing. They didn't just sell goods, they sold stories. The Phoenicians understood the allure of the exotic and crafted an image that was as much about mystique as it was about merchandise. When they traded with distant lands, they didn't just bring back products. They brought back tales of far-off places, of lands beyond the horizon, where the sun dipped into the ocean's embrace. But let's not romanticize them into oblivion. The Phoenicians were savvy businessmen through and through. They knew their way around a negotiation table better than most, and they played the market like a fiddle. Take their monopoly on Tyrian purple, for example. By controlling both the production and the narrative, they created demand that was sky-high. This wasn't just a dye. It was a symbol of power and prestige. Wearing it was akin to flashing a platinum credit card. Everyone knew you'd made it. Digging deeper into their trade practices, we uncover a world of economic maneuvering that would make even the most hardened Wall Street trader raise an eyebrow. The Phoenicians had a knack for exploiting political vacuums, stepping into the breach whenever a major empire faltered. This wasn't just opportunism, it was strategic genius. They had an uncanny ability to read the winds of change and adjust their sails accordingly, ensuring their trade networks remained robust and profitable. Their penchant for secrecy wasn't just about safeguarding routes, though. It was a matter of survival. The Mediterranean was a competitive arena, teeming with pirates and rival traders eager to cut in on their action. By keeping their methods and routes under wraps, the Phoenicians maintained their edge in a cutthroat market. It was a high-stakes game that required both wit and wariness. Now, let's take a step back and examine how primary sources have shaped our view of the Phoenicians. Ancient authors like Herodotus and Strabo painted them as intrepid explorers, but these accounts often veered into the fantastical. Even our modern fascination with them as the original sea guards stems from these embellished narratives. It's crucial to recognize that historical sources are often colored by the biases and agendas of their authors. In reality, the Phoenician story is a blend of myth and materialism, romance and reality. On the economic front, it's clear that the Phoenicians were more industrialists than adventurers. They were the logistical masterminds of their age, crafting an economic empire that was as efficient as it was expansive. Their trading posts and colonies were strategically placed, not just to facilitate commerce, but to control it. This wasn't just about making money, it was about maintaining a stranglehold on the flow of goods across the Mediterranean. And while we're busting myths, let's address the idea that the Phoenicians were purely peaceful traders. Sure, they preferred commerce to conquest, but they weren't afraid to flex their maritime muscle when necessary. Their ships were designed for speed, yes, but also for defense. They were well armed and ready to fend off threats, an essential feature in a world where piracy was as common as a sunny day in the Sahara. Socially, the Phoenicians were as complex as the trade networks they built. Their society thrived on competition, not just with external rivals, but within their own ranks. City-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos weren't just allies. They were rivals vying for dominance. This internal competition spurred innovation and drove them to continuously improve their maritime technologies and strategies. In essence, the Phoenicians were the ultimate pragmatists, balancing the art of trade with the science of survival. They were the ancient world's answer to today's tech giants, using their resources to craft a legacy that was both influential and enduring. They understood the power of narrative, using it to weave an image that was as much about perception as it was about reality. As we peel back the layers of myth surrounding these enigmatic seafarers, it's clear that the Phoenicians were more than just mystical mariners. They were strategic savants, masters of marketing, and pioneers of trade. Their story is one of calculated risks and cunning strategies, a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. And while their legacy may be cloaked in mystery, it's a mystery worth unraveling one nautical mile at a time. Stay tuned as we continue this voyage into the world of the Phoenicians, where there's always more beneath the surface than meets the eye. Their tale is far from over, and as we sail into the next chapter, remember this: history is not just about what happened, but about how we choose to remember it. Fast forward to the later centuries, and you find the Phoenicians facing the colossal forces of Greek and Roman expansion. Picture this: the Greeks, with their insatiable hunger for expansion, and the Romans, those relentless empire builders, were the bulldozers of antiquity, reshaping the Mediterranean landscape with their military might and political prowess. For the Phoenicians, this meant navigating a rapidly changing world where staying afloat required more than just a sturdy ship. The Greeks were like the new kids on the block, bringing with them a wave of cultural and economic competition. Their city-states, particularly Athens, were flourishing and expanding their influence across the Mediterranean. Greek colonies popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, encroaching on Phoenician territories and trade routes. It was the classic case of being squeezed out by a younger, more aggressive neighbor. Meanwhile, the Romans were no less formidable. Rome, with its legendary legions and unyielding ambition, was on the rise. By the time they clashed with Carthage in the Punic Wars, Rome had already transformed from a scrappy little city-state to a burgeoning empire with an appetite for domination. The Phoenicians, particularly their Carthaginian descendants, found themselves fighting for survival against a foe that played by an entirely different set of rules. Now, let's talk numbers. The Punic Wars, those epic clashes between Rome and Carthage, spanned over a century from 264 BCE to 146 BCE. The Second Punic War alone saw Carthage Hannibal, that tactical genius, leading his elephants across the Alps, a feat as audacious as it was daring. But for all his brilliance, Hannibal was ultimately outmaneuvered by Rome's sheer tenacity and superior resources. The final blow came in 146 BCE, when Rome razed Carthage to the ground, leaving a scar in history as deep as the Mediterranean itself. But even as the Phoenician cities fell to these expanding empires, their influence endured. Their alphabet, that nifty little invention we mentioned earlier, was like a linguistic Trojan horse. It infiltrated Greek and Latin scripts, laying the groundwork for the alphabets we use today, and their innovations in shipbuilding and navigation. Those were the blueprints for future maritime exploration, setting the stage for a world where the seas were highways rather than barriers. Economically, the Phoenicians left a legacy that outlasted their political power. Their trade networks had established patterns of commerce that would continue to flourish under Greek and Roman control. The idea of connecting distant lands through trade was a concept that would resonate through the ages, influencing economic systems long after the last Phoenician ship had sailed. Culturally, the Phoenicians were the unsung connectors of the ancient world. They were the original middlemen, facilitating not just trade, but the exchange of ideas and cultures. The goods they traded were conduits for cultural diffusion, spreading technologies, religious practices, and artistic influences across the Mediterranean. This cultural tapestry, woven by Phoenician hands, would continue to influence societies long after their political demise. And let's not forget their lessons in resilience and adaptability. The Phoenicians, with their strategic genius and economic acumen, thrived in a world of uncertainty. They understood that in the face of change, innovation was not just an advantage, it was a necessity. Their ability to navigate political upheavals and economic challenges was a testament to their ingenuity and foresight. In the end, the Phoenicians remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a narrative shaped by those who dare to innovate. They were the masters of their fate, riding the currents of opportunity with skill and savvy. Their story is a testament to the power of commerce and communication, a legacy that continues to shape our world in ways both seen and unseen. So as you drift into sleep, think of the Phoenicians sailing under a starlit sky, their ships laden with treasures and ideas that would ripple through history. These were the masters of the sea, the architects of trade and culture, whose legacy is etched into the very fabric of our world. In a time when empires rose and fell, the Phoenicians proved that sometimes the biggest waves are made by those who know how to ride the current of opportunity. In 1299, a small group of warriors in Anatolia, led by Osman I, was about to throw a major wrench in the gears of history. And by small, I mean really small. Picture a few hundred guys, tops. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in ambition, cunning, and a clear disregard for the traditional script of medieval state building. They were like the startup that came out of nowhere and ended up dominating the entire market for centuries. The Ottoman Empire, folks. Eventually stretching over 3 continents, it all began with Osman and his merry band of not-so-invincible warriors. Now, let's not romanticize Osman's crew as some kind of medieval Avengers. The idea of the invincible Ottoman warrior is as much a fairy tale as a dragon-slaying knight. Sure, they had their moments of glory, but let's be real. Every military has its off days. What made the Ottomans remarkable wasn't their ability to win every battle, but their knack for capitalizing on a win, no matter how scrappy. When they scored a victory, they turned it into a stepping stone for something greater. And when they lost, well, they were experts at acting like it was all part of the plan. One of Osman's greatest hits was his use of strategic marriages. Forget swiping right. Osman and his successors knew that a good marriage could be worth more than 1,000 swords. They weren't just looking for love. They were looking for land, alliances, and influence. Marrying into power was the medieval equivalent of a hostile takeover, but with less paperwork and more feasting. Osman's son, Orhan, was no slouch either. He took the empire-building baton and sprinted with it. By 1326, Bursa was theirs, marking the Ottomans' first major victory in taking a city that wasn't just a pile of rocks with a nice view. Bursa became the empire's first capital and a hub of culture and commerce. Under Orhan, the Ottomans expanded into the Balkans, playing chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers. He even introduced coins, which was kind of a big deal. Imagine trying to run an empire on a barter system. Trading goats for grain gets old fast. Amazingly, the Ottomans didn't just survive, they thrived. That's partly thanks to their ability to adapt. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, or at least use some of their ideas. The Ottomans borrowed smartly from their neighbors, administrative practices from the Byzantines, military tactics from the Persians. No shame in learning from the best, right? They were like the magpies of the medieval world, picking up shiny ideas and weaving them into their own nest. Now, let's talk logistics, because managing an empire is far more than just a game of risk. Expanding territory isn't just about planting a flag and calling it a day. It involves taxes, laws, and keeping the peace among a bunch of people who might not even speak the same language. The Ottomans were ahead of their time with their administrative savvy. They set up a system that allowed for local autonomy while still keeping the Sultan's grip tight enough to control the lands. They were walking the tightrope of centralization versus autonomy like seasoned circus performers. And here's a fun fact. The Ottomans were big fans of religious tolerance, at least for the time. They didn't force conversion on their subjects, which was a smart move when you're ruling over a diverse population of Christians, Jews, and Muslims. Instead, they imposed a tax on non-Muslims, which, let's face it, was a clever way to fill the treasury without starting a riot every other week. It was all about keeping the peace and keeping the coffers full. But let's not pretend it was all sunshine and roses. The early Ottomans had their fair share of challenges. There were rebellions to quell, rival factions to outmaneuver, and the constant threat of invasion. Yet somehow, they always managed to come out on top, like a medieval cat with 9 lives. They knew that the real game was about staying one step ahead, whether through diplomacy, strategic marriages, or the occasional battle. So next time you hear about the invincible Ottoman warrior, remember that they were more than just a bunch of guys with swords. They were strategists, diplomats, and sometimes just plain lucky. They took a tiny Anatolian state and turned it into a powerhouse that lasted over 600 years, all by knowing when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to marry the right person. Now that's what I call playing the long game. The Ottomans were strategists, diplomats, and sometimes just plain lucky. They took a tiny Anatolian state and turned it into a powerhouse that lasted over 600 years, all by knowing when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to marry the right person. Now that's what I call playing the long game. But let's hit the fast-forward button to the 16th century, when the Ottoman Empire hit its peak, starring none other than Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan with a name as grand as his ambitions. Now, if you think Suleiman's nickname was just a bit of medieval marketing, think again. This guy earned it. During his reign from 1520 to 1566, the Ottoman Empire was the medieval version of a Fortune 500 company, and Suleiman was its CEO. He wasn't just managing a massive portfolio of territories, he was expanding it. Under his watch, the empire stretched from Hungary in the west to the Persian Gulf in the east, and from the Crimean Peninsula in the north to the Arabian Sea in the south. We're talking about an area of over 5 million square kilometers. That's a lot of land to cover, even for a guy with a really good horse. But what really made Suleiman's era the Golden Age was the empire's ability to mix the opulence of the court with the cold, hard realities of power. Picture the Ottoman court as a lavish Netflix period drama where intrigue and power plays were as common as a new season drop. The palace was a kaleidoscope of silks, jewels, and gold. Think Versailles, but with better kebabs. And let's talk about the wardrobe budget. Suleiman's robes alone would make a Kardashian green with envy. Yet, beneath all the glamour, there was a robust administrative machine humming away. The Ottomans had an incredibly sophisticated bureaucracy for the time, the envy of any HR department today. They had a merit-based system known as the Devsham, where Christian boys were recruited, converted to Islam, and trained as soldiers and administrators. It sounds dubious, but it was effective. These recruits, known as janissaries, were fiercely loyal to the Sultan, providing him with both military prowess and administrative acumen. Imagine combining the loyalty of a golden retriever with the efficiency of a Swiss watch. Suleiman's court wasn't just a fashion show, it was a think tank. The Sultan surrounded himself with some of the sharpest minds, including his Grand Vizier, Pargali Ibrahim Pasha, and the legendary architect Mimar Sinan. Under Sinan's eye, the empire saw an incredible architectural boom. Structures like the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul weren't just places of worship. They were statements of power, blending Ottoman, Islamic, and Byzantine influences into something uniquely magnificent. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous aspects. The empire wasn't just a collection of shiny buildings and well-dressed courtiers. It was a complex society dealing with a mosaic of ethnicities, religions, and languages. Managing this diversity was like trying to conduct an orchestra where half the musicians are playing jazz and the other half are stuck on Beethoven. Suleiman's solution: rule through a mix of tolerance and taxation. Non-Muslims paid a tax called the jizya, a revenue stream that made the treasury sing while keeping the peace. It's a classic case of you do you, as long as you pay up. Now, onto the high seas, where the Ottomans ruled the Mediterranean like a medieval mafia. Thanks to a naval commander named Hayreddin Barbarossa. Yes, that Barbarossa. The Ottoman fleet dominated the waters from the Aegean to the shores of North Africa. In 1538, the Battle of Preveza saw Barbarossa's fleet defeat a much larger Holy League armada, cementing Ottoman naval supremacy. It was like watching an underdog sports team take down the league champions in a nail-biter of a match. However, the Ottoman machine wasn't just about conquering land and sea. It was about controlling the flow of goods, and with it, wealth. The empire straddled key trade routes between Europe and Asia, acting as a toll booth for the lucrative spice trade. This strategic location turned the Ottomans into gatekeepers of commerce, facilitating and taxing the flow of goods like silk, spices, and precious metals. If you think your internet service provider has a monopoly, try dealing with the 16th century Ottomans. Yet, for all its pomp and power, the empire was not invincible. The court intrigues were real, and Suleiman's family dynamics could rival any soap opera. The most infamous episode involved his beloved wife, Roxolana, also known as Hurrem Sultan. She was a former concubine who rose to become Suleiman's legal wife, wielding significant influence. Her ascent upset the status quo, leading to plots and counterplots that wouldn't be out of place in a Shakespearean tragedy. The power plays at court were as treacherous as a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons. So, while Suleiman's reign was indeed magnificent, it was also a balancing act of diplomacy, military might, and domestic stability. It was a time when the Ottomans were not just a force to be reckoned with, but a civilization that blended the best, and sometimes the worst, of different cultures. As we move forward, let's not forget that even the grandest empires are built on a foundation of both visionary leadership and the gritty realities of governance. Stay tuned, because the Ottoman story is far from over, and the plot twists only get thicker from here. As the sun set on Suleiman's golden era, the Ottoman Empire found itself at a crossroads where the road signs were written in a mix of Latin, Arabic, and a good dose of uncertainty. The 17th and 18th centuries weren't exactly the highlight reel for the Ottomans. It was more like the blooper reel, where things didn't go quite as planned. Picture an empire juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Exciting, but a little dangerous if you lose your balance. The Ottomans had gotten a taste of being the big boss on the block, and as any overextended empire will tell you, that's when the real work starts. Enter a period of constant warfare that stretched the empire's resources thinner than the foam on your overpriced cappuccino. They were fighting on multiple fronts, like trying to hold a family reunion and a corporate takeover at the same time, while also handling a minor kitchen fire. Let's start with the military defeats, because nothing says, reality check, quite like getting your imperial backside handed to you. The siege of Vienna in 1683 was a pivotal moment. The Ottomans, led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, showed up at the gates of Vienna with an army estimated to be around 150,000 strong. They were like the rock stars of siege warfare, but this time the encore didn't go as planned. The Polish king, Jan Roman III Sobieski, swooped in with reinforcements, and what was supposed to be a grand Ottoman victory turned into a retreat that was less brave strategic withdrawal and more run for the hills. This defeat was the first domino in a series of military setbacks. It led to the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, which saw the Ottomans losing significant territories in Central Europe. This was the first time they had to give up such a large chunk of land in a peace treaty, and it was like watching the empire's stock price plummet overnight. The Ottomans were no longer the unstoppable force they once seemed, and neighboring powers were all too eager to take advantage of the situation. Now, let's talk economics, because war isn't just fought on the battlefield. It's also fought in the treasury. The Ottoman economy during this period was like a rickety old wagon trying to keep up with a sports car. The empire's failure to keep pace with European advancements in trade and industry meant they were playing catch-up in a game that was already halfway over. The influx of silver from the New World had caused inflation across Europe, and the Ottomans felt it too. The price of goods soared, but the empire's revenue didn't exactly get a matching raise. To make matters worse, the Ottomans were heavily reliant on agriculture and lacked the industrial base that was beginning to transform European economies. Picture running a marathon with a backpack full of rocks while your competitors are cruising by on hoverboards. It was a recipe for economic stagnation, and the empire's coffers were often emptier than a New Year's resolution gym in February. And then there was the rise of nationalism, a concept that was beginning to take root in the very lands the Ottomans ruled over. Nationalism was like the rebellious teenager in a family of empires, questioning authority and demanding independence. The empire's diverse population, which had once been a strength, now became a powder keg of ethnic and religious tensions. In the Balkans, the Greeks, Serbs, and Romanians began to dream of independence, fueled by the romanticized notion of reclaiming their ancient glories. It was like trying to keep a lid on a pot of boiling water. Eventually, the steam finds a way out. Now, let's debunk a popular myth, the idea that the Ottomans were blissfully unaware of their problems, like a clueless sitcom character stumbling through life. In reality, they were very much aware of the cracks forming in their imperial facade. The rulers of the empire were not sitting around in opulent palaces, oblivious to the world outside. They were actively trying to modernize and reform their military and administrative systems, albeit with mixed success. The Tulip period in the early 18th century saw an attempt at cultural and administrative reform, inspired by European innovations. It was a time of relative peace and prosperity, marked by an interest in art, architecture, and yes, tulips, because who doesn't love a good flower craze? These reforms, however, were like trying to patch a leaking boat with duct tape. The empire's problems were deep-rooted, and superficial fixes weren't going to cut it. The Janissaries, once the elite backbone of the Ottoman military, had become a powerful and conservative force resistant to change. They were like the office printer that jams every time you try to print something important, only much more dangerous and prone to rebellion. Meanwhile, the Ottoman rulers had to contend with internal power struggles and intrigue that made palace life feel like an episode of Survivor, but with fewer immunity challenges and more poisonings. The influence of powerful women in the harem, the sultan's mothers and wives, played a significant role in court politics, often leading to factionalism and instability. It was a world where alliances shifted like sand dunes in the desert, and today's ally could be tomorrow's rival. Yet, despite the setbacks and challenges, the Ottomans were nothing if not resilient. They managed to hang on, adapting and adjusting to the changing geopolitics of the time. Their story is a testament to the complexity of empire, a balancing act of power, diplomacy, and sheer will to survive. As we move forward in the story, the Ottoman saga continues, full of twists and turns that would leave any scriptwriter envious. So keep your seatbelt fastened, because this historical roller coaster has plenty of loops and drops left to navigate. As the Ottoman roller coaster rattled into the 19th century, it was clear the track was getting a little rickety. The empire's heyday was long past, and the ride was about to get bumpy. Picture an empire that used to be the life of the party, now awkwardly lingering at the punch bowl, hoping no one notices it's overstayed its welcome. That's the Ottomans for you at this point, hanging on, but barely. Enter the Tanzimat reforms, the empire's attempt to slap on a fresh coat of paint and pretend everything was fine. Starting in 1839, these reforms were about as ambitious as trying to renovate a crumbling mansion with a toolbox from IKEA. The name Tanzimat literally means reorganization. And oh boy, did they try to reorganize. The aim was to modernize the army, revamp the tax system, and bring in a semblance of equality for all citizens, regardless of religion. Noble goals, but in an empire as diverse and sprawling as the Ottomans, this was like herding cats, lots and lots of cats. Let's talk numbers. The Tanzimat reforms introduced a new taxation system meant to streamline revenues and curb corruption. Prior to this, the tax system was about as predictable as a lottery, with local notables collecting taxes in a way that often left the empire's coffers emptier than a soda can at a teenage party. The reforms aimed to change this and bring in consistent revenue, but getting everyone on the same page was easier said than done. Imagine telling a room full of toddlers to share their candy. Everyone has their own idea of what sharing means. And then there was the issue of equality. The Hatay Sharif of Gulhain, a key edict in the Tanzimat era, promised that all Ottoman subjects, whether Muslim, Christian, or Jew, would be treated equally under the law. Sounds great on paper, right? But in practice, it was like announcing that everyone would have an equal share of a pie when there's hardly any pie to go around. Plus, old habits die hard, and ingrained social hierarchies don't just vanish because someone says so. The reforms were too much for some, and not enough for others, an awkward middle ground that satisfied no one. While the Ottomans were busy trying to fix their internal mess, the rest of Europe was eyeing them like a cat watching a fishbowl. The empire had earned the unflattering nickname, the sick man of Europe, a term coined by Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. It was like a high school popularity contest where the Ottomans found themselves at the bottom of the social ladder, trying desperately to stay relevant. The European powers were playing a high-stakes geopolitical chess game, with the Ottoman Empire as the board. Britain, France, Russia, and Austria-Hungary each had their agendas, and the Ottomans were caught in the crossfire. The Crimean War from 1853 to 1856 was a prime example, a conflict that saw the Ottomans allied with Britain and France against Russia. It was like a messy breakup where everyone else gets involved, and nobody really wins. The Ottomans managed to hold onto their territory, but at the cost of becoming ever more reliant on European powers, who were all too happy to lend money, at steep interest rates, naturally. Debt was mounting as fast as a modern-day student loan, and the empire's fiscal health was on life support. And let's not forget the internal strife. The empire's population was a patchwork quilt of ethnicities and religions, and nationalism was the seam ripper pulling it apart. The Balkans, in particular, were a hotbed of rebellion, with Greeks, Serbs, and Bulgarians all vying for independence. The Ottomans faced uprisings that were less about minor grievances and more about full-scale revolts. These were not easy to brush off as teenage rebellion. They were existential threats to the empire's very fabric. Meanwhile, the economy was struggling to keep up with the changing times. The Industrial Revolution had turned Europe's economies into juggernauts, while the Ottoman Empire was still chugging along with its agrarian base. Trade routes that once filled Ottoman coffers were being bypassed by new maritime paths, thanks to the advent of steamships. It was as if the Ottomans were stuck in the analog world while everyone else had gone digital. The empire's inability to industrialize meant it was increasingly dependent on European goods, creating a trade deficit that was the financial equivalent of trying to dig your way out of a hole with a teaspoon. In this climate of uncertainty, the Ottomans tried to keep up with Western innovations, but it was like trying to run a marathon in flip-flops. Despite their efforts, they were always a step behind. The introduction of the first Ottoman constitution in 1876 was a bold move, an attempt to bring about parliamentary governance. But old habits die hard, and the Sultan, Abdul Hamid II, quickly suspended the constitution in 1878, deciding that maybe democracy was best left to the Europeans. As the century wore on, the Ottomans found themselves increasingly sidelined on the world stage. The Berlin Conference of 1878, intended to resolve the Eastern question, was a stark reminder of their diminishing influence. European powers carved up the Balkans like a Thanksgiving turkey, with little regard for Ottoman interests. The empire was left holding the scraps, its territory gradually shrinking like a well-worn sweater in the wash. Yet, despite the setbacks, the empire soldiered on, albeit with a limp. The Tanzimat reforms, for all their flaws, set the stage for later attempts at modernization. The seeds of change had been planted, even if the garden was overrun with weeds. The Ottomans were like a boxer who refuses to throw in the towel, even when the odds are stacked against them. As we leave the 19th century behind, it's clear the Ottoman Empire is hanging by a thread. The story is far from over, and the twists and turns of the 20th century promise to be just as tumultuous. So hang tight, because this historical saga is about to enter its final act, one filled with drama, intrigue, and the last gasps of an empire that refuses to go quietly into the night. As the Ottoman Empire limped into the 20th century, it found itself caught in the gravitational pull of World War I, a conflict that was less about national pride and more about who could outdo whom in the bad decisions department. The war was a black hole of alliances and enmities that sucked the Ottomans in, aligning them with the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. The empire was like that friend who joins a group trip just to avoid FOMO, not really considering the itinerary, but all too soon realizing they're in way over their head. On the battlefield, things went south faster than a snowbird in January. The Gallipoli campaign of 1915 was a rare moment of Ottoman defense prowess, where they managed to fend off the Allied forces, including a young Winston Churchill. The Allies had hoped to knock the Ottomans out of the war by capturing the Dardanelles, a strategic waterway, but instead they ended up with a military debacle that was less triumphant victory and more tragic mistake. Ottoman forces, led by a certain Mustafa Kemal, remember that name, held their ground, turning what was supposed to be a swift campaign into a drawn-out quagmire. Gallipoli was a Pyrrhic victory, though, as the overall war effort drained the empire's resources and morale. Fast forward to 1918, and the Ottomans were on the losing side of history. The Armistice of Mudros marked their official surrender, and the empire was on its last legs, having lost vast territories to the Allies. The once mighty land that stretched across 3 continents was now reduced to a rump state, its fate sealed by the infamous Treaty of Sevres in 1920. This treaty was less a negotiation and more a diktat, slicing up what remained of the Ottoman lands like a pizza at a frat party. The Allies carved out chunks for themselves and their friends, leaving the Ottomans with little more than the Anatolian heartland. But before you start playing the world's smallest violin for the Ottomans, enter Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the man who took one look at the empire's wreckage and decided it was time for a serious makeover. Think of him as the Marie Kondo of the early 20th century, looking at the clutter of the Ottoman past and asking, does this spark joy? Spoiler, it didn't. Ataturk led the Turkish national movement in a war of independence against both the occupying Allied forces and the puppet Ottoman government. The man was a whirlwind of modernity, challenging traditional norms and championing secularism with the kind of fervor usually reserved for sports fans on game day. By 1923, Ataturk had not only won independence for Turkey, but also established it as a secular republic, effectively pulling the curtain down on the Ottoman Empire. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed in 1923, replaced the Treaty of Sevres, recognizing the sovereignty of the Republic of Turkey and redrawing the map once again. Ataturk's reforms were radical. He abolished the Sultanate, banned the fez, and replaced the Arabic script with the Latin alphabet, a move that was as bold as it was controversial. Imagine waking up one day and being told the language you've always written in is now obsolete. Talk about a cultural shake-up. Ataturk didn't stop there. He pushed for women's rights, secular education, and industrialization, laying the groundwork for a modern nation-state. His policies were as transformative as they were divisive, reshaping Turkish society in a way that still resonates today. Ataturk was a complex figure, a leader who was both revered and reviled, but undeniably a force of nature. His vision was clear. Turkey would be independent, secular, and modern, leaving behind the Ottoman legacy like a snake shedding its skin. Yet, the legacy of the Ottoman Empire is anything but simple. While Ataturk might have been eager to consign it to the dustbin of history, its influence lingers in the architecture, culture, and politics of the region. The empire's system of millet autonomy, where religious communities governed themselves, left a mark on the multicultural fabric of the Middle East. The administrative savvy and architectural grandeur of the Ottomans can still be seen from Istanbul's skyline to the mosques of Cairo. And let's not forget the culinary gifts the Ottomans left behind. From baklava to kebabs, the empire's influence on food is a delicious reminder that cultural exchange doesn't just happen in books. The Ottomans were, in their heyday, a melting pot of cultures, and their cuisine reflects that vibrant amalgamation. So next time you bite into a piece of baklava, remember that you're tasting a piece of history with all its layers of complexity and sweetness. The Ottoman Empire's fall wasn't just an end. It was a transformation, a phoenix moment that led to the birth of modern Turkey. The empire's story is far more nuanced than a simple rise and fall narrative. It's a saga of adaptation and resilience marked by both triumphs and tragedies. The Ottomans were not just conquerors and rulers. They were patrons of art, architects of cities, and curators of a diverse cultural legacy that continues to echo through time. In the grand tapestry of history, the Ottomans remind us that empires are like living organisms, complex, adaptive, and ultimately mortal. They rise, they flourish, and they fall, leaving behind legacies that shape the world in ways both obvious and subtle. So, as you close the book on the Ottoman Empire, remember that history is never just about endings. It's about the stories that continue to unfold, the legacies that endure, and the lessons that, if we're wise enough to recognize them, make us richer for the knowing. If you've ever thought today's Australian wildlife was a bit on the wild side, kangaroos kickboxing their way across the outback, koalas being adorable yet surprisingly aggressive, you haven't seen anything yet. Let's rewind the clock to prehistoric Australia, a time when the creatures roaming the land could make your worst nightmares seem like a Disney cartoon. First on the guest list of this prehistoric horror show is the Diprotodon, the largest marsupial to ever walk the earth. Picture a wombat the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, and there you have it. Weighing in at around 800 kilograms, and stretching up to 4 meters long, the Diprotodon wasn't just a hefty lawn ornament. It was a mobile mountain of muscle and fur. This gentle giant roamed the ancient Arsi landscape between 6,046,000 years ago, munching on the local flora without a care in the world. But don't let its herbivorous diet fool you. Getting stepped on by one of these lumbering giants was likely an occupational hazard for smaller creatures. Now, while the Diprotodon might be the teddy bear of our prehistoric lineup, let's talk about something that could spice up your nightmares, the Dramornis. This bird was essentially a murder chicken on steroids, standing over 3 meters tall and weighing more than 500 kilograms. Imagine a bird that could look an NBA player in the eye without flapping a wing. Known as the demon duck of doom, it wasn't exactly a duck you'd want to feed bread crumbs to on a lazy Sunday. There's still some debate about whether it was carnivorous, but the fact that we're even debating this should give you a sense of its terrifying potential. And speaking of things that could swallow you whole, enter the megalania. If you think the Komodo dragon is a fearsome predator, this ancient lizard would make it look like a pet store gecko. Stretching over 7 meters long and weighing nearly 1,000 kilograms, the megalania was the largest terrestrial lizard to ever grace our planet. It's like nature decided to throw together a T-Rex and a modern-day monitor lizard just to see what would happen. It's believed that this giant reptile prowled the Pleistocene landscapes, eyeing mammals, birds, and maybe even humans as potential snacks. Now, you might be thinking, surely humans weren't around to see these creatures, right? Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Evidence suggests that the first Australians, who arrived around 65,000 years ago, might have had front row seats to this ancient Jurassic Park. Just imagine setting up camp and having to worry about a megalania slithering into your backyard barbecue. Talk about a party crasher. Of course, the coexistence with these mega beasts didn't last forever. Around 46,000 years ago, many of these terrifying titans disappeared. Theories abound as to why. Climate change likely played a role, with the continent undergoing significant shifts that altered the availability of food and water. But let's not forget about the human factor. Early Australians, equipped with their wits and some sharp tools, might have hunted these creatures, contributing to their extinction. And honestly, who could blame them? If your choices are be hunted or do the hunting, most would choose the latter. But let's not romanticize it too much. This wasn't a simple tale of humans versus monsters. It was an intricate dance of survival, adaptation, and transformation. People had to navigate a world where the line between predator and prey was blurred, where the next valley could hide a threat or an opportunity. It was a time when survival depended not just on strength, but on strategy, resilience, and perhaps a healthy dose of luck. So, there you have it, a glimpse into a world where the term nightmare fuel might have been coined just to describe the local fauna. As amusing as it is to imagine these giant creatures blundering around the outback, their presence shaped the world in profound ways. They forced early humans to innovate and adapt, setting the stage for the complex tapestry of life that would follow. And while we might chuckle at the idea of a Volkswagen-sized wombat, it's a stark reminder that nature has always had a flair for the dramatic. Stay tuned, because this was just the opening act. The opening act of prehistoric Australia's wildlife drama might have been a hit, but the real spectacle was the set design. A landscape constantly in flux, swinging between extremes like a pendulum on a sugar rush. Welcome to the climate roller coaster that was ancient Australia, where Mother Nature seemed to play dice with the weather just to keep things interesting. Now, when we talk about climate change today, we often throw around phrases like drastic shifts and unpredictable patterns. But honestly, prehistoric Australia could teach our modern climate a thing or two about unpredictability. Over millions of years, the continent experienced wild environmental shifts that would make even the bravest meteorologists sweat bullets. We're talking ice ages and warm spells, wet periods and dry spells, all coming and going like uninvited guests at a backyard barbecue. Take the Pleistocene epoch, a time when Australia saw its own version of a seasonal Netflix binge, except it was glaciers and desertification on repeat. The continent's climate swung from wet to dry and back again more times than a boomerang thrown by an over-enthusiastic tourist. During cooler periods, glaciers crept over parts of the region, turning it into a frigid wonderland. But when things heated up, and they did, thanks to the Earth's orbit and axial tilt, those glaciers melted faster than a popsicle in the outback, flooding vast areas and transforming the landscape into a patchwork of lakes and wetlands. However, weather doesn't always mean friendlier, especially when you're a creature trying to make a living in this topsy-turvy environment. For our prehistoric giants like the Diprotodon and the Megalania, these climate shifts were less of a minor inconvenience and more of an existential crisis. The continent's flora and fauna had to adapt or face extinction, and let's just say nature didn't hand out participation trophies. During the Ice Ages, the cooler, drier climate meant less vegetation, not exactly a buffet for our VW-sized wombat friends. As the continent dried out, vast stretches turned into arid deserts, making it tough for herbivores to find a decent meal. And if the salad bar is closed, the predators, like our pal Megalania, are going to have a rough time too, considering their diet wasn't exactly gluten-free. But it wasn't just about finding food. Water sources became increasingly scarce, turning what was once a thriving ecosystem into a game of survival for the fittest. Rivers dried up, lakes evaporated, and suddenly the creatures of Australia found themselves in a real-life version of musical chairs, except the chairs were watering holes and the music was the relentless sun beating down. These environmental pressures didn't just shape the physical landscape, they sculpted the evolutionary paths of the species living there. As the climate changed, so did the animals. Some developed new traits to cope with the harsh conditions, while others simply couldn't keep up. It was adapt or die, a Darwinian race where only the most resilient species made it to the finish line. Yet, amidst this chaos, some creatures thrived, evolving into forms that could withstand the relentless changes. Kangaroos, for instance, became the champions of dry land, developing powerful hind legs that allowed them to hop vast distances in search of food and water. Meanwhile, the ancestors of modern-day emus swapped flight for speed, turning into fleet-footed runners capable of traveling across the parched Australian plains. But let's not romanticize this survival story too much. While it's easy to admire the resilience of these species, the reality was brutal. Many animals didn't make it. The extinction of megafauna like the diprotodon wasn't just a matter of natural selection. These giants were also the casualties of a rapidly changing world where they simply couldn't keep pace with the environment. Now, before you go thinking this was all just nature taking its course, remember that humans were part of this story too. As the early Australians adapted to these changing landscapes, they became adept at reading the environment, learning to live in harmony with it, or at least as harmoniously as you can when you're sharing space with a giant killer lizard. They developed new tools and techniques to hunt and gather food, navigating the shifting sands both literally and metaphorically. This intricate dance between humans and nature in prehistoric Australia offers valuable lessons for us today. It's a cautionary tale of how climate can shape the destiny of entire species, including ours. The challenges faced by the early inhabitants of Australia remind us that while we might be at the top of the food chain now, the planet still holds all the cards. And while we might not have to worry about a diprotodon crashing our next BBQ, the climate roller coaster is far from over. So, as we ponder the grandeur of prehistoric Australia and its many climatic twists and turns, let's remember, the real drama wasn't just in the size of the creatures, but in the resilience and adaptability required to survive in such a dynamic world. As we face our own climate uncertainties today, perhaps there are lessons to be learned from those who walked this land long before us. And with that, we leave our time-traveling adventure open, ready to dive deeper into the stories yet to be told. Stay tuned, because the prehistoric saga continues with even more astonishing twists and turns. As we dust off our time machine and settle back into prehistoric Australia, let's buckle up for a ride into the land of early human arrivals. Imagine stepping off your dugout canoe around 65,000 years ago onto a continent teeming with creatures that seem like rejects from a sci-fi thriller. This was the world the first Australians encountered, an ancient land where survival wasn't just a hobby, it was an Olympic sport. Now, let's get one thing straight. These early humans weren't just wandering around aimlessly like contestants on a reality TV show. They were skilled navigators, having somehow managed to traverse the treacherous waters separating Southeast Asia from this new and mysterious land. And they didn't just wash up on the shores by accident. No, these folks had their eyes on the prize, a new world full of resources, albeit with a few giant, furry roadblocks in the way. You see, the arrival of humans in Australia was about as subtle as a rock concert in a library. They brought with them a toolkit of stone implements, including sophisticated blades and scrapers, perfect for those DIY projects like, processing large game. And here's where things get interesting. their presence coincided with a decline in the megafauna population. Coincidence, or were these humans the original party crashers who left a trail of extinct species in their wake? Of course, the plot thickens when we consider the climate angle. Archaeologists and paleontologists have been locked in a debate that rivals any primetime drama. Was it humans or climate change that dealt the final blow to these giant creatures? On one side, we have the overkill hypothesis, suggesting that early humans, with their penchant for hunting, played a significant role in driving these species to extinction. After all, a diprotodon might have made for a feast that even the most seasoned BBQ master would envy. But let's not gloss over the climatic chaos that was ancient Australia. Around 46,000 years ago, the continent was experiencing a climate yo-yo, swinging between wet and dry spells that made life difficult for even the most adaptable of species. As lush landscapes turned into dusty plains, food and water became scarce. For the megafauna, it was like going from a buffet to a breadline overnight. So it's entirely plausible that these environmental changes were the real culprits, creating a world where only the fittest, or the luckiest, could survive. In recent years, archaeological findings have added fuel to this fiery debate. Excavations at sites like Cuddy Springs suggest that humans and megafauna coexisted for thousands of years, a narrative that challenges the notion of a quick, human-led extinction. These digs have uncovered stone tools and megafauna bones in the same sedimentary layers, indicating a prolonged overlap. It's like finding a fossilized party invitation, proof that early Australians and these massive creatures were, at least for a while, neighbors. But let's not jump to conclusions faster than a kangaroo on caffeine. While these discoveries muddy the waters, they also emphasize the complexity of prehistoric ecosystems. The reality is, the extinction of Australia's megafauna was likely a multifaceted affair, a delicate dance of climate, humans, and nature's fickle tendencies. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces have been chewed up by the dog. As we sift through this ancient mystery, it's crucial to remember that early humans weren't just passive players in this drama. They were active participants, adapting to and sometimes altering their environment. For instance, the use of fire to manage landscapes and improve hunting prospects was a clever, if risky, strategy. Known as fire stick farming, this practice involved controlled burns to flush out game and promote the growth of edible plant species. It was both an art and a science, and it hints at a sophisticated understanding of ecological management. Yet, as with all great stories, there's a twist. The very tools and techniques that helped early Australians thrive might have also contributed to the decline of the megafauna. By altering habitats and increasing hunting pressures, they inadvertently tipped the scales against these giants. It's a classic tale of unintended consequences, a reminder that every action has a ripple effect, especially when you're playing in nature's sandbox. So, as we ponder the arrival of humans in ancient Australia and their role in the extinction saga, let's not paint with a broad brush. The truth is likely more nuanced than any single theory can capture. It's a story of survival and adaptation, of humans navigating a world filled with towering predators and unpredictable climates. And while we may never have all the answers, the quest for understanding is as compelling as the mystery itself. As we continue our journey through prehistoric Australia, let's keep our minds open to the twists and turns of this ancient narrative. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never as straightforward as we'd like to believe. Stay tuned for more revelations, because this saga is far from over. There are still plenty of surprises lurking in the eons of time. As we continue our journey through this prehistoric wonderland, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of survival strategies that early Australians deployed to thrive in what was essentially nature's extreme sports venue. These folks weren't just sitting around waiting for the next ice age to blow over. They were actively shaping their environment and adapting in ways that would make even Bear Grylls take notes. First off, let's talk about fire. No, not the kind that warms your cozy campfire sing-alongs, but the kind that transforms entire landscapes. Early Australians were the original pyromaniacs, practicing what's known today as fire stick farming. This was not some haphazard act of lighting up the bush like it's Guy Fawkes night. This was strategic, controlled burning with intent. By setting fire to patches of land, they encouraged the growth of new plant species that attracted game, effectively turning the continent into a buffet of fresh salads for herbivores. And when the salad bar is open, the meat-eaters aren't far behind, making hunting a slightly less Herculean task. Now, you may wonder, why go through all this trouble just for a barbecue? Well, think about it. The climate was throwing mood swings that would rival any teenagers. The landscape was shifting faster than fashion trends, and resources were about as reliable as a politician's promise. Fire management wasn't just about food. It was about crafting a sustainable ecosystem, a tailored habitat that they could depend on in the long run. It was a masterclass in ecological engineering, and it highlights the sheer ingenuity of these early inhabitants. Of course, it wasn't all fire and flames. These folks had an arsenal of tools that would make a Swiss Army knife look like a child's toy. Stone tools were the bread and butter of their survival kit, and they weren't just bashing rocks together hoping for the best. No, they had mastered the art of crafting sharp blades and scrapers, perfect for everything from skinning a diprotodon, should they be so fortunate, to making shelters that could withstand the harsh elements. We're talking precision engineering here, folks. It's as if they had their own version of Prehistoric Kickstarter, funding tool innovations one chipped stone at a time. But let's not forget the economic context of it all. Resources in prehistoric Australia were as scarce as a Wi-Fi signal in the outback. Every tool made, every fire started, was a calculated risk. Wasting resources was not an option. It was a matter of life and death. This wasn't just survival. It was survival with style, prioritizing efficiency and foresight in a world that was anything but forgiving. Yet, it's crucial to note that early Australians weren't just lone wolves. They were part of complex social networks that would put your LinkedIn connections to shame. Trading, sharing, and collaborating were key to their success. They swapped tools, knowledge, and even stories. Because let's be real, who doesn't love a good yarn around the fire? This sense of community was their safety net, their insurance policy against the unpredictable whims of nature. The social dynamics didn't stop there. Leadership structures and decision-making processes were integral to maintaining order in their communities. While we may romanticize the idea of a wise elder dispensing sage advice, the reality was far more nuanced. Decisions were likely made through consensus, a democratic process that ensured everyone had a stake in the outcome. It's like a prehistoric town hall meeting, minus the PowerPoint presentations. As we peel back the layers of this ancient society, it becomes evident that they weren't just surviving. They were thriving in a way that resonates with the principles of modern sustainability. They understood the delicate balance between taking from the land and giving back, a lesson that holds profound relevance in today's world of overconsumption and environmental degradation. Of course, every rose has its thorn, and the ingenious strategies of these early Australians came with their own set of challenges. The very fires that sustained their way of life could easily spiral out of control, turning into raging infernos that devoured vast expanses of land. And the tools they relied on, while advanced for their time, were limited by the availability of suitable materials. Finding the right kind of stone wasn't exactly a walk in the park, but perhaps the most compelling aspect of their survival was their adaptability. Nature threw curveballs that would make the most seasoned baseball player flinch, yet these people managed to stay in the game. They read the land like an open book, learning to interpret the signs and adjust their strategies accordingly. It was an ongoing process of trial and error, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. As we ponder the extraordinary survival strategies of these early Australians, it's worth remembering that their story is not just one of survival against the odds. It's a narrative of human creativity, collaboration, and adaptability, a saga that continues to inspire and inform us today. And while we may never fully unravel the mysteries of their world, the quest to understand their journey is as thrilling as the journey itself. So, as we leave this chapter open for more exploration, let's keep in mind that the past is a treasure trove of lessons, waiting to be uncovered and applied. The prehistoric Australians may have walked a land that was a complete nightmare in terms of challenges, but they did so with a level of sophistication and understanding that remains profoundly relevant. Stay tuned, because the next part of this saga promises to unearth even more insights into the world of our ancient ancestors. So, As we leave this chapter open for more exploration, let's keep in mind that the past is a treasure trove of lessons, waiting to be uncovered and applied. The prehistoric Australians may have walked a land that was a complete nightmare in terms of challenges, but they did so with a level of sophistication and understanding that remains profoundly relevant. Stay tuned, because the next part of this saga promises to unearth even more insights into the world of our ancient ancestors. Fast forward to today, and it's clear that Australia hasn't entirely shed its reputation for being a challenging place to live. Sure, the megalania isn't lurking in the bushes anymore, but modern Australia brings its own set of hurdles. From the infamous Great Emu War. Yes, Australia once lost a military campaign to a bunch of large, flightless birds. To the ongoing battle with invasive species and climate change, the continent continues to test its inhabitants' resilience. But let's not kid ourselves. The issues of today, like climate change, have a lot more in common with those prehistoric challenges than we might think. The early Australians faced a climate that swung like a pendulum on a bender. The modern world isn't far behind. Global warming is upping the ante with its own brand of unpredictability, throwing droughts, heat waves and bushfires into the mix. And much like their ancient predecessors, contemporary Aussies are finding themselves in a race to adapt or face the consequences. The parallels don't end there. Take water scarcity, for example. In prehistoric times, finding enough water was akin to winning the lottery with a $2 scratcher. Today, the Murray-Darling Basin, Australia's largest river system, is under immense pressure due to over-extraction and climate-induced changes. It's a stark reminder that water, the elixir of life, remains as crucial and as elusive as ever. Economically, Australia has always been a land of boom and bust cycles. Back in the day, the availability of resources dictated survival, and today, the economy still dances to the tune of commodities like iron ore and coal. The mining industry might be the backbone of modern Australia's wealth, accounting for around 10% of its GDP. But it's also a double-edged sword, contributing to environmental degradation and climate change. You could say that Australians have been living off the land for over 65,000 years, but the stakes have only gotten higher. And then there's the cultural legacy. Indigenous Australians, the descendants of those first intrepid explorers, continue to honor the traditions and knowledge passed down through millennia. Their understanding of the land, honed through countless generations, offers insights into sustainable living that the modern world would do well to heed. Practices like fire stick farming have evolved into controlled burns that help manage bushfire risks today, a perfect blend of ancient wisdom and contemporary science. Speaking of science, prehistoric Australia is like the ultimate research laboratory, offering a window into evolutionary biology, climatology, and anthropology. Modern scientists are still piecing together the puzzle of how ancient Australians lived and thrived, using cutting-edge technology to date artifacts and map ancient landscapes. Every new discovery adds another brushstroke to the canvas of human history, reminding us that the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting to be rediscovered. Yet, let's not fall into the trap of romanticizing the past too much. It's easy to get swept up in the nostalgia of a time when humans lived in harmony with nature, but the reality was far more brutal. Life expectancy was short, disease rampant, and the struggle for survival relentless. The romanticized vision of the noble savage, living in a prehistoric paradise, glosses over the harsh realities of daily life. Prehistoric Australians were tough, resilient, and inventive, but they were also human, subject to the same frailties and fears as we are today. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, if anything, Australia's prehistoric past teaches us that adaptability is the name of the game. Whether it's dodging megafauna or navigating the complexities of climate change, the ability to adapt has been crucial to survival. It's a lesson that resonates through the ages, reminding us that while the challenges may change, the need for resilience remains constant. As we wrap up this journey through time, let's reflect on how far we've come and how far we still have to go. The legacy of prehistoric Australia isn't just a fascinating chapter in the annals of history. It's a living, breathing testament to human ingenuity and endurance. It's a story that continues to shape our understanding of the world and our place within it. In the end, prehistoric Australia's nightmare fuel was also its greatest teacher. It challenged its inhabitants to innovate, adapt, and survive in ways that continue to inspire us today. So next time you find yourself grumbling about the heat, the drought, or even the latest politics, just remember, you're following in the footsteps of people who faced down some of the greatest challenges nature could muster, and lived to pass their stories on. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth preserving. The rooster's crow slices through the dawn like a disgruntled alarm clerk, yanking you from the depths of slumber. You're not in a plush, modern-day suite. Nope, you're nestled in a tatami-matted room, and today, my friend, you're a samurai in feudal Japan. That might sound glamorous, but let's peel back the lacquered facade and dig into the nitty-gritty of your warrior morning routine. First off, forget any notion of leisurely breakfast or checking your phone. In the 1600, you're up with the sun, because let's face it, honor waits for no one. And neither does your daimyo, the feudal lord who expects you to be ready at the drop of a kabuto, your trusty helmet. As you rub the sleep from your eyes, you reach for your armor. This isn't your average off-the-rack suit. This is custom-tailored, painstakingly crafted, and costs more than a decent-sized village. We're talking about a small fortune, around 2 koku, or about 10 bushels of rice. For context, that's enough to feed a family of 4 for a whole year. The process of getting dressed is like an elaborate dance, where one wrong step could leave you looking less like a fierce warrior and more like a tangled marionette. You start with a kimono, but we're not talking about the lightweight ones you see at summer festivals. This is your shitage, a sturdy undergarment that's kind of like the medieval equivalent of under armor. Next up is the hakama, those wide-legged pants that scream, I mean business. Then comes the do, the chest armor, which hugs you tighter than a clingy X. Made from iron plates and lacquered leather, it's heavier than your morning grumpiness, about 25 pounds of protection. As you buckle and tie, you silently thank the armorers, those unsung heroes of the samurai world. Without them, you'd be toast. Now, let's chat about that Bushido code everyone's always raving about. It's often painted as a noble path of honor and virtue, but honestly, it's more about survival. The code emphasizes loyalty, courage, and yes, a dash of self-discipline, but it's also a handy guide to not getting yourself killed. You're not just a soldier, you're a bureaucrat, a peacekeeper, a tax collector, and sometimes a babysitter for the daimyo's horses. The hierarchy is strict, and you know your place. You've got a boss, and your boss has a boss, and somewhere at the top of this human pyramid is the shogun, who'd prefer you keep any personal ambitions neatly tucked away like your katana at a tea ceremony. Speaking of katanas, yours is more than a weapon. It's a status symbol, an heirloom, and a reflection of your very soul. It's also a small fortune, possibly the most expensive item you own. A good swordsmith could spend months crafting a blade, folding the steel over and over, until it's as sharp as your wit. This isn't some mass-produced hunk of metal. It's a work of art that could slice a silk scarf in midair. As you strap on your katana, you're reminded of the weight of expectation it carries. It's not just about slicing through the enemy. It's about slicing through the day without losing your head, metaphorically or literally. The morning air is crisp as you step outside, feeling the cool breeze against your face. The sun's barely up, but the world is already buzzing with activity. Servants scurrying, the clang of hammers as blacksmiths get to work, and somewhere, the distinct sound of a samurai practicing his kiai, that battle cry meant to intimidate foes and energize allies. You take a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and the faint whiff of wood smoke from early morning fires. You're not just gearing up for combat. You're preparing to navigate a world where every gesture, every word, and every silence has meaning. The samurai life is a balancing act between power and servitude, honor and practicality. It's a world where a misplaced word can be as deadly as a misplaced arrow. So as you stand there, armored and ready, remember that being a samurai is less about the glory of battle and more about the daily grind. It's about living the code, understanding the hierarchy, and always being prepared for whatever the day throws your way. Whether it's a skirmish or a tea ceremony, you're ready to face it all with the quiet resolve that's expected of a samurai. Welcome to your day in feudal Japan, where every morning is the dawn of a new adventure, and one where you hope to end it with your head still firmly attached to your shoulders. As you step into the world outside your samurai abode, let's smash the romantic fantasy of 2 warriors meeting on a misty bridge for an epic showdown. Real talk. Your day is more about land management, than legendary duels. Sure, you carry a katana, but you're not slicing through enemy hordes like a video game hero. Instead, you're the medieval equivalent of a district manager, juggling responsibilities that would make a modern bureaucrat weep into their coffee. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of your societal role. You serve your daimyo, the guy who keeps you in business provided you keep the rice fields fertile and the peasants in line. Forget the notion of samurai as lone wolves. They were more like intricate cogs in the feudal machine. Your daily grind involves overseeing agricultural production, collecting taxes, usually in rice, because, hey, it's the currency of the realm, and ensuring everyone knows their place in the pecking order. You're the middleman between the peasants working the land and the shogun at the top of the pyramid. Economics plays a big part in keeping your status as a samurai intact. Maintaining that swanky armor and a top-notch katana isn't cheap. You need cash to pay for repairs, upgrades, and of course, the occasional splurge on a lavish tea ceremony to impress your peers. A good samurai estate required at least 100 koku annually to sustain a small household and a couple of retainers. That's a lot of rice, and a lot of pressure to make sure your fields are more bountiful than your rivals. But the real kicker, your status isn't guaranteed. Unlike the rock-solid social structures of medieval Europe, where a knight's lineage was his ticket to permanence, samurai status was more fluid. A bad harvest, a political misstep, or simply rubbing the daimyo the wrong way could see you demoted faster than you can say seppuku. And speaking of that grim tradition, it's less about noble sacrifice and more about a social safety valve to maintain order. If you mess up, it's a way to fall on your sword, literally, before anyone else does it for you. Now, let's talk warfare. The myth of the samurai as fearless warriors in constant battle is a bit of a stretch. Sure, there were conflicts, especially during the Sengoku period, when Japan was basically a giant game of Risk. But by the Edo period, peace was the norm, and your sword saw more action in ceremonial displays than on the battlefield. In reality, much of samurai warfare was strategic rather than brute force. Battles were often won before they even began, thanks to alliances, betrayals, and the age-old art of diplomacy. Your job was to outthink your opponent, not just outfight them. And let's not forget your role as enforcers of the shogun's will. This wasn't just about swinging swords. It was about maintaining the intricate balance of power. You were part of a system that relied on everyone knowing their role and sticking to it, a delicate dance of order and discipline. It's a world where a misplaced word could be as dangerous as a misplaced arrow. Keep the peace, collect the taxes, and make sure the right people are happy, or at least not plotting your downfall. And hey, speaking of keeping people happy, let's not overlook the samurai's role in cultural affairs. The tea ceremony, poetry, and calligraphy weren't just hobbies. They were essential parts of a samurai's life. Mastery in these arts showed you weren't just a brute with a blade, but a refined gentleman of culture, capable of both using a sword and appreciating the delicate beauty of a cherry blossom. This was the softer side of the samurai, the part that balanced out the warrior ethos with a touch of elegance. It was about showing that you could handle both the sword and the pen, maintaining harmony between duty and beauty. So, as you go about your day, remember, being a samurai is about much more than just battle. It's about navigating a complex web of social and economic responsibilities while keeping your head and your estate intact. It's a life where every decision, every action carries weight, and where the true challenge is balancing the romantic notion of the warrior with the gritty reality of your daily duties. And as you walk through your domain, overseeing your lands and directing your retainers, you realize that this balance is what truly defines the samurai way. With the morning's duties checked off your list, it's time to switch gears. Welcome to midday, where the samurai life morphs from clipboard-carrying land manager to warrior in training. You might think this is where the blood-pumping battle cries echo across the dojo, but spoiler alert, it's less gladiator arena, more cross between a wellness retreat and a very intense art class. First up, the swordplay. Sure, the katana is the rock star of the samurai's arsenal, but let's not forget the supporting acts. Enter the yumi, the longbow, a weapon that requires more than just good aim. It demands the patience of a saint and the steady hand of a surgeon. Picture this. You're standing in the dojo, bow in hand, drawing back the string, which is no small feat considering this bad boy is over 2 meters tall. That's taller than LeBron James, for those keeping score. This isn't just about hurling arrows across a field, though. Archery is a full-body workout that would make your local CrossFit coach proud. The bow is crafted from bamboo and wood, materials that might sound quaint, but trust me, will make your muscles scream louder than your sensei. And the cost. A quality Yumi could set you back 10 to 15 ryo, which translates roughly to a month's salary for a skilled artisan. Ouch. But in the grand samurai tradition, it's not enough to just have the tools. You have to master them, and that means daily practice. We're talking about hours of repetitive drills, focusing on form, precision, and that elusive Zen state where you and the bow become one. The social pressure to excel is intense because, let's face it, nobody wants to be the samurai who can't hit the broadside of a barn. And in a society where saving face is paramount, messing up in front of your peers is about as appealing as a bowl of cold miso soup. Now, if you think the training starts with weapons, think again. Enter calligraphy, the samurai's not-so-secret weapon. Why calligraphy, you ask? Well, wielding a brush with elegance might not sound as thrilling as wielding a sword, but in the eyes of your peers, it's just as important. Mastery of the brush showed you weren't just a brute swinging steel, but someone who could capture the essence of a cherry blossom with a single stroke. This isn't just art, it's a statement of your cultural prowess. Here's the kicker. A fine calligraphy brush could cost up to 1 ryo, which might not sound like much compared to the Yumi, but in a world where every expense counts, it's a reminder that being a samurai isn't just a job, it's an investment. You're expected to be the Renaissance man of your time, blending martial prowess with intellectual and artistic skills. And yes, that means you're as likely to be found practicing kanji as you are practicing kiai. Breaking the myth of constant combat, the reality is that the samurai spent more time penning poems than drawing blood. The Bushido Code wasn't just about dying well. It was about living well, mastering the arts of both war and peace. The social pressures to excel in these disciplines were immense, driven by a culture that valued balance, harmony, and the ability to adapt. Samurai were expected to be both warriors and scholars, a duality that might seem contradictory, but was entirely by design. And let's not gloss over the economic realities. The cost of equipment, training, and maintaining your status as a samurai was like a never-ending subscription service. You had to keep up with the Joneses, or in this case, the Tokugawas, and that meant shelling out for the latest in armor tech or attending the right tea ceremonies. It was a delicate dance of financial acumen and social savvy, ensuring that your reputation was as polished as your sword. So as you stand there, Yumi in one hand, brush in the other, remember that being a samurai isn't just about the thrill of battle. It's about the art of balance, the discipline of daily practice, and the constant reminder that the pen, or brush, can indeed be mightier than the sword. Welcome to the midday grind of a samurai, where every stroke, every draw, and every step is a testament to your dedication, your honor, and your unyielding quest to be more than just a warrior. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the courtyard, it's time to trade your solitary pursuits for the intricate dance of samurai social life. Strap in, because navigating these waters makes swordplay look like child's play. We're diving into the world of power dynamics and political intrigue, where every nod, bow, and sideways glance can shift the tide of your fortunes. First up, you've got your fellow samurai, your equals in rank, but not necessarily in allegiance. The samurai code might preach loyalty, but it's a loyalty to your daimyo first and foremost, not necessarily to each other. It's a bit like being on a reality TV show where alliances are temporary and betrayals are just a commercial break away. You're constantly weighing your words, ensuring that your casual conversation doesn't inadvertently plant a dagger in your own back. Here's the kicker. In a world where face-saving is paramount, the social dance is as much about what you don't say as what you do. Silence can be golden or deadly, depending on who's interpreting it. The right pause here, a well-timed laugh there, and you're threading the needle between camaraderie and competition. It's a high-stakes game of social chess, where the rules are unwritten, but the consequences are all too real. Now, let's talk political alliances, because in feudal Japan, your social standing is only as secure as your last strategic handshake. You might think that being a samurai is all about stoic solitude, but in reality, it's more about networking than a modern-day LinkedIn account. Your daimyo is not just your boss, he's your lifeline, and you're expected to be his eyes, ears, and occasionally his sword. Feudal Japan was a patchwork of territories, each ruled by a daimyo who was a law unto himself, provided he didn't tick off the shogun. These lords were constantly looking over their shoulders, wary of rivals, and sometimes even their own retainers. If Game of Thrones taught us anything, it's that uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, or in this case, a kabuto. A daimyo's power was as stable as his alliances, which were as fickle as the weather. In this cutthroat world, samurai often found themselves playing the role of diplomat. You're not just a warrior, you're a walking, talking embodiment of your lord's will. You're the guy who gets sent to smooth over disputes or lay the groundwork for a new alliance. Picture yourself like a medieval James Bond, minus the gadgets but with twice the formal attire. But here's where it gets dicey. The line between diplomacy and deception is razor thin. A smile can conceal 1,000 secrets, and a friendly gesture might just be the precursor to betrayal. The history books are littered with stories of daimyos who found themselves on the wrong end of a political maneuver. The infamous betrayal of Eichai Mitsuhide against Oda Nobunaga in 1582 is a stark reminder that in this world, the backstabber is often the one standing the closest. And that brings us to the somewhat grim reality of samurai life, the ever-present threat of betrayal. It's an occupational hazard in a society where power is as fluid as a rushing river. You've got to be as sharp as your katana, always ready for the unexpected. In a place where falling on your sword could be both literal and figurative, trust is a luxury few can afford. The threat of betrayal is like the sword of Damocles, hanging perpetually over your head. Yet, despite this precariousness, there's a strange kind of appeal to it all. The tension, the drama, it's like living in a perpetual cliffhanger. It's no wonder that the romanticized image of the samurai has endured. The allure of an existence where every day could be your last, and every ally could be your enemy, is the stuff of legends. Just remember, the reality of living in such a world is far less glamorous than the stories suggest. So, as you mingle with fellow samurai and curry favor with your daimyo, keep one eye on the conversation and the other on the exits. You're not just a warrior in armor. You're a player in a grand game of strategy and survival. Welcome to the social fabric of feudal Japan, where the stakes are sky high and the rules are always changing. This is the real samurai code, where honor, loyalty, and a sharp mind are your best weapons. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, the samurai's world begins its subtle transformation. Now comes the time to shed the ceremonial armor of the day and step into the more personal, yet no less demanding, role within the household. Here, the myth of the lone warrior gives way to the complex tapestry of family life, where you're not just a samurai, you're a parent, a spouse, and a linchpin in the web of familial obligations. Let's dive into the dynamics at play. Family for a samurai isn't just about blood ties. It's a mini-empire you're expected to rule with the same discipline you wield on the battlefield. We're talking about a household that often includes not just immediate family, but retainers, servants, and sometimes even the extended clan. And keeping this entourage running smoothly, that's a task worthy of any daimyo. Just as in battle, maintaining order means navigating through layers of hierarchy and tradition. But let's get real. The family dinner table isn't exactly an oasis of tranquility. The pressure to maintain honor doesn't just vanish when you step through the door. It's more like a stubborn stain that refuses to fade. In a society where a father's disgrace can ripple down the generations faster than a whispered rumor, the stakes are high. You're raising future samurai, after all, and molding them into paragons of the Bushido code is as daunting as it sounds. Here's a nugget to chew on. In a samurai household, education starts early. We're talking about a curriculum that includes everything from martial arts to classical Chinese literature. By the age of 10, a samurai child might already be practicing with a wooden sword, learning the art of archery, and studying Confucian texts. This isn't just about training warriors. It's about crafting well-rounded individuals who can navigate the complex social and political landscapes of feudal Japan. And speaking of landscapes, let's not forget about the leisure activities that punctuate the samurai's day. You might imagine evenings filled with quiet meditation or perhaps a contemplative tea ceremony. While those did happen, leisure for a samurai often involved pursuits that could double as social currency. Think poetry competitions, where a cleverly constructed haiku could earn you respect and admiration. Or no theater, a cultural staple that wasn't just entertainment, but a venue for political networking. The cost of a good seat at a no play, about 1 ryo, not a small sum when you're balancing a household budget that relies heavily on rice. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, the myth of the samurai as solitary figures, untethered by the bonds of family or community. In reality, the opposite is true. Samurai were deeply embedded in a mesh of social obligations. They were expected to uphold their family's honor at all costs, be it through the battlefield, the arts, or the shrewd management of their estates. This was no lone wolf existence. It was a life interwoven with the fortunes and misfortunes of many. And here's the kicker. This web of obligations didn't just end at home. You're part of a larger clan structure, where alliances and feuds could mean the difference between rising in status or losing everything. A samurai's loyalty was first to their lord, but it was also to their kin, their ancestors, and their descendants. Every action, every decision was a thread in this intricate tapestry, and keeping it from unraveling was a lifelong endeavor. So as the evening draws to a close, you're left with a moment of reflection, a chance to ponder the weight of legacy. What does it mean to be a samurai, truly? It's a life fraught with contradictions. The romantic ideal of the noble warrior versus the gritty reality of daily survival. The allure of solitary heroism versus the necessity of communal bonds. You're not just living for yourself, but for those who came before and those who will come after. In the quiet moments before sleep, as the echoes of the day fade away, you realize the truth behind the myth. The samurai's life is a complex dance of duty, honor, and survival. It's not just about personal glory or martial prowess. It's about maintaining a delicate balance between tradition and change, between the individual and the community. Legacy of the samurai endures not because of their legendary battles or iconic armor, but because of their ability to adapt, to endure, and to face the world with unwavering resolve. And there you have it, my friend. The samurai weren't just warriors. They were guardians of a way of life, a tradition that demanded the best of them in every realm they touched. As you drift off to sleep with these new insights, remember that in the world of the samurai, the personal was always political, and every day was another chapter in a story that continues to captivate imaginations centuries later. The sun barely peeks over the horizon when you're jolted awake by the blare of a military horn. It's 500 BCE, and you're in the heart of the mighty Persian Empire. Forget your snooze button. There's no time for lounging in this world. You're a soldier now, and it's time to rise and shine, or else. The Persian army isn't just any fighting force. It's a colossal machine, with more than 100,000 men, all moving together like a well-oiled chariot. Welcome to your not-so-cozy new life. First up, let's talk about the Immortals. No, not some mythical band of superheroes, but a real elite group of 10,000 soldiers, the creme de la creme of Persia's might. They're called the Immortals because their number was always kept at exactly 10,000. Lose one, and another would instantly replace him. Now, that's job security with a touch of eeriness. As a regular soldier, you're probably not mixing with these guys, but their presence is felt everywhere, like an ancient version of celebrity influencers. Discipline here makes modern military boot camps look like a weekend yoga retreat. You're part of a structure so strict that any deviation from orders could lead to punishment. The Persians were big on hierarchy, and you'd better respect it. Your daily routine is as predictable as a sunrise. Drills, marches, and more drills. Forget about a leisurely breakfast. You're handed some flatbread and dates to fuel up before the day's grind begins. Not exactly a continental buffet, but it keeps you moving. Marching is no small feat when you're part of an army this size. Imagine trying to coordinate over 100,000 men across varied and often hostile terrains. It's like organizing the world's worst family road trip, minus the bickering, plus a lot more sweating. Logistics are the unsung hero of this story. The Persians excelled at moving their army swiftly, thanks in part to the famed Royal Road, a marvel of ancient infrastructure. Stretching over 500 miles from Sardis to Susa, it provided a smooth path for soldiers, messengers, and supplies. Herodotus claimed couriers could cover the entire distance in about 7 days, a feat that would even impress your Amazon Prime delivery guy. Now, let's talk food. Keeping this hungry horde fed is a massive undertaking. You're part of a living, breathing organism that requires tons of grain and meat daily. The Persians had it down to a science, using a network of supply depots stationed along the royal road to keep the army's bellies full. If you're lucky, you might snag some lamb stew at the end of the day, but don't get your hopes up for any Michelin stars. As you march, you can't help but notice the diversity around you. The Persian army is a veritable melting pot, drawing soldiers from across the vast empire. Medes, Elamites, Babylonians, and more. It's a regular United Nations of the ancient world. This diversity is both a strength and a logistical nightmare. Language barriers, check. Cultural differences, double check. But somehow it all comes together under the unwavering command of the great king. Despite the romantic allure of the Persian army's grandeur, being here isn't all glory and adventure. It's mostly sweat, blisters, and a constant reminder that retirement plans weren't exactly a thing yet. The romanticized vision of noble warriors clashing in epic battles often glosses over the mundane realities of soldiering. The constant marching, the weight of your armor, and the ever-present possibility of meeting your end in a far-flung province. But let's not get too gloomy. There's something undeniably impressive about this military machine. The Persians mastered the art of war and administration, building an empire that stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. The army was its backbone, and you, my friend, are a cog in this grand imperial wheel. As the day drags on, you find a rhythm in the march, the steady beat of sandals on the dusty road, the occasional bark of an officer, and the thought of a warm fire at the end of the day. The sun is starting to set, casting long shadows on the landscape. You're exhausted, but there's a strange comfort in the routine, in knowing that you're part of something bigger. Tomorrow you'll do it all over again. But for now, as you settle down with your fellow soldiers, sharing stories and maybe a laugh or two, you can almost convince yourself that you belong here. Almost. As the embers of the campfire flicker out, you're reminded of what's on the agenda for tomorrow. Training. Not just any training. This is the type of regimen that would make modern-day CrossFit enthusiasts break a sweat just thinking about it. Welcome to the world of archery, horseback riding, and survival skills, Persian style. If you thought the morning marches were rough, buckle up, because this is where the real fun begins. First, let's talk archery. The bow isn't just a weapon here, it's an art form. The Persians weren't fooling around when they picked up their bows. They used the recurve bow, a piece of technology that would have made any ancient arms dealer's mouth water. These bad boys were crafted from wood, horn, and sinew, capable of launching arrows with devastating power over long distances. You had to master shooting while standing, kneeling, and even from horseback. Imagine trying to hit a target while galloping full tilt on a horse. Not exactly your average office team-building exercise, but who needs trust falls when you've got a quiver full of arrows? Next up, horseback riding. You'd think that with so many horses in the empire, riding one would be as easy as riding a bike. Not so fast. The Persians were renowned for their cavalry, and for good reason. The cavalry was the elite of the elite, and being a competent rider was non-negotiable. If you're picturing leisurely trots through the desert, think again. It was all about speed, maneuverability, and endurance. And then there were the horses themselves, magnificent beasts, bred for their strength and stamina. Even Alexander the Great later admired Persian cavalry, which should tell you something about their prowess. And then their survival skills. Forget about your fancy modern camping gear. You had to learn how to make do with what you found in the environment. Foraging, hunting, and setting up camp in inhospitable terrain were all part of the curriculum. This wasn't just about staying alive. It was about thriving so you could fight another day. A night under the stars might sound romantic now, but when you're using rocks for a pillow, the novelty wears off quickly. Now, let's touch on the economic realities of your new career. Spoiler alert. Ancient Persian soldiers weren't exactly rolling in riches. Unlike modern armies where you get a steady paycheck, Persian soldiers often got paid with plunder, land, or sometimes nothing at all. Those who did receive payment were typically paid in kind. Think food, supplies, and maybe a plot of land if you were really lucky. The Persian economy was heavily agrarian, and soldiers often doubled as part-time farmers. This wasn't just a job, it was a lifestyle choice. You were expected to provide for yourself and contribute to the larger empire-building project. Maintaining such a massive force came at a staggering cost. The empire had to keep everyone fed, armed, and mobile, which required an intricate system of supply lines and logistics. We're talking about a military budget that would make modern accountants reach for the aspirin. It wasn't just the soldiers who needed sustenance. Horses, too, had to be fed and cared for, adding another layer of complexity to the military machine. But why all this effort and expense? Enter stage left, the political motivations of the kings. Take Cyrus the Great, for example. This isn't just any king. This is the guy who created one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. His military expansions weren't just about acquiring land. They were about consolidating power and spreading influence. It was a game of chess on a grand scale, with each conquest adding another piece to the board. And let's not forget Darius I, who took the empire to new heights, both literally and figuratively. His reign saw the empire stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, a testament to the might of the Persian army. These kings weren't just warmongers, they were strategic visionaries. Their military campaigns often had economic motivations, like securing trade routes or acquiring valuable resources. The Royal Road, that marvel of engineering, wasn't just for marching armies. It was a conduit for trade and communication, knitting the empire together like an ancient internet. The expansions under Cyrus and Darius were as much about economic prosperity as they were about military dominance. So here you are, a small cog in this grand machine, sweating it out on the training fields and trying to make sense of your place in the world. It's easy to get swept up in the romantic allure, the grand battles, the vast empire, the legends of kings and conquerors. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a gritty reality. It's a world of hard work, discipline, and a constant struggle for survival. And yet, despite the blisters and the bone-weary exhaustion, there's a strange sense of pride in being part of something so monumental. As you drift off to sleep, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. More training, more marching, more of the same. But there's also the promise of adventure, of being part of history in the making. You, a soldier in the Persian army, a witness to the rise of an empire. It's enough to make anyone dream big, even if those dreams are interrupted by the blare of a military horn at dawn. As the first rays of dawn signal another grueling day ahead, you're catapulted from the land of dreams back into the gritty reality of life as a Persian soldier. But hold your horses. Before you charge into glory, let's pause for a midday reality check. And by reality check, I mean a deep dive into the delightful world of ancient health and hygiene. Spoiler alert, it's not exactly the stuff of heroic epics. Now, forget any notions of gleaming warriors with shining armor and perfect smiles. In reality, the Persian army's hygiene practices, or lack thereof, were enough to make any modern-day germaphobe break out in a cold sweat. Sure, the Persians excelled at empire building, but when it came to personal cleanliness, let's just say they were a bit behind the curve. Sanitation was less about weekly spa days and more about trying not to keel over from dysentery. To start, let's talk about the water situation. Clean water wasn't always readily available, and soldiers often had to make do with whatever they could find. Picture this, a line of parched soldiers eagerly gulping down water from a murky stream. Refreshing, maybe. Safe, not so much. This less than crystal clear water was a breeding ground for diseases like dysentery and cholera. These weren't just minor inconveniences. They were serious threats that could decimate entire groups faster than you could say antibacterial soap. And then there's the matter of bathing, or the lack thereof. The Persian soldiers weren't exactly luxuriating in bubble baths. Bathing was an occasional luxury, not a daily ritual. When they did manage to take a dip, it was usually in whatever body of water was nearby, shared with livestock and who knows what else. The result? A fragrant blend of sweat, grime, and battlefield debris, a perfume that would never make it to the shelves of your local department store. But here's where it gets interesting. The Persians, like many ancient cultures, had a unique approach to medicine. Their medical knowledge was a curious mix of practical treatments and rituals straight out of a fantasy novel. Physicians existed, but they were a rare breed, and their methods included a blend of herbal remedies, prayers, and sometimes a dash of magic. If you were lucky enough to snag the attention of a doctor, you might be treated with honey and wine for wounds or given willow bark to chew for pain, essentially ancient aspirin. However, when it came to more complex ailments, the options were limited. Surgery was primitive at best, and anesthesia was, well, non-existent. Imagine having an arrow removed from your leg without any pain relief. Fun times, right? If you survived the procedure, you were considered fortunate. If not, well, you became another casualty of the harsh realities of ancient warfare. What's truly fascinating is how these gritty details contrast with the romanticized image of the Persian soldier. In the tales that have echoed through the ages, these warriors are depicted as noble and invincible, like something out of a blockbuster movie. But in reality, they were just as vulnerable to the ravages of disease and infection as anyone else. Their swords and shields might have been formidable, but against the unseen enemy of illness, they were often powerless. Enter the Immortals, the legendary elite troops of the Persian Empire. These guys weren't just soldiers, they were symbols. Their very name conjures images of warriors who could defy death itself. In truth, the Immortals were no more immune to disease than the next soldier. Their immortality was more about maintaining their numbers than any supernatural resilience. Lose one, replace him immediately. That was the drill. It was a clever bit of branding, a psychological tactic that added to their mystique and intimidation factor. The symbolic role of the Immortals extended beyond mere military might. They represented the enduring strength and unity of the Persian Empire, a living testament to the power of organization and discipline. Unlike the rest of the army, they were always well-equipped and well-fed, a priority for the empire that saw them as the perfect embodiment of its ambitions. The Immortals were as much about optics as they were about warfare, an ancient PR campaign with swords. Despite their elevated status, the Immortals still faced the same grim realities as their fellow soldiers. They marched, they fought, and they fell ill like everyone else. But the Persian Empire knew the value of perception. By maintaining the illusion of invincibility, they bolstered morale and struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. The Immortals were a constant reminder that the empire was vast, organized, and always ready to replace its losses, a psychological weapon as potent as any spear. Yet, while the Immortals marched into legend, the rest of the army soldiered on, grappling with the harsh conditions of their everyday lives. The romantic image of the Persian warrior collides head-on with the reality of living in cramped, unsanitary conditions, battling both the enemy and the environment. It was a far cry from the glitz and glamour of royal courts and epic tales. So, as you trudge through the dust and heat, it's worth remembering that beneath the armor and bravado, these soldiers were human. They faced the same fears, hopes, and struggles as any soldier in history. Their battles weren't just fought with swords and arrows, but with the very conditions of their existence. Disease, hunger, and exhaustion were as much a part of their reality as any physical foe. In the end, the Persian army's story is a complex tapestry of glory and grit. It's about the clash between the ideal and the real, between the legends we've inherited and the truths we uncover. As you march on, shoulder to shoulder with your fellow soldiers, you're not just part of an empire, you're part of a legacy that celebrates both the heroism and the hardships of those who came before you. So, next time you hear tales of ancient warriors and their epic deeds, remember the other side of the story. The side that includes unsung heroes battling not just for their empire, but for their very survival. The side that reveals the raw, unvarnished truth about life as a soldier in the mighty Persian army. Because in the end, it's the stories of struggle and endurance that truly stand the test of time. As you march on in the dusty heat, you can't help but wonder about the battles that made the Persian Empire a force to be reckoned with. It's one thing to get caught up in the tales of valor, but quite another to grasp the gritty mechanics of ancient warfare. Welcome to the afternoon of your life in the Persian army, where the clang of swords is matched only by the clang of reality. First up, let's talk strategy. The Persians weren't just about brute force. They used their brains as much as their brawn. Picture this, a battlefield that's not just a chaotic mess of shouting and bleeding, but a well-orchestrated opera of tactics. The Persians were masters at psychological warfare. They knew that a demoralized enemy was half-beaten before the first arrow was loosed. Imagine seeing a seemingly endless line of warriors advancing toward you. The sheer scale of the Persian forces, sometimes numbering over 100,000, was enough to make even the bravest opponents question their life choices. And then there's the cavalry, the ancient equivalent of a tank battalion. The Persians loved their horses, and for good reason. Cavalry units were the empire's pride and joy, offering speed, maneuverability, and a psychological edge. Picture charging into battle atop a majestic steed, the ground thundering beneath you. It's not just about the thrill. Cavalry units were crucial for flanking maneuvers, breaking enemy lines, and pursuing fleeing foes. The Persians perfected the art of the cavalry charge, a tactic that could turn the tide of battle in a heartbeat. But let's not get carried away with the romance of gallant charges and heroic last stands. The Battle of Marathon, for example, offers a lesson in how even the mightiest armies can falter. In 490 BCE, the Persians faced the Greeks on the plains of Marathon. Now, you've probably heard the sanitized version, a small band of valiant Greeks defeating a massive Persian force. While it's true the Greeks were outnumbered, they had home field advantage and used terrain to their benefit. The Persians, confident in their numbers, underestimated the Greek hoplites' discipline and tactical nous. And just like that, the legend of Persian invincibility took a hit. Speaking of invincibility, let's tackle the myth head-on. The Persian army was formidable, no doubt about it, but they were far from invincible. Propaganda played a massive role in shaping their image. The Persians were adept at crafting a narrative of power and dominance. And why not? In a world without Twitter or CNN, controlling the narrative was a potent weapon. By projecting an image of unstoppable force, they didn't just intimidate their enemies. They inspired loyalty and fear within their own ranks, ensuring the cohesion of a vast and diverse empire. Now, let's zoom in on the nitty-gritty. Battles weren't just grand spectacles. They were logistical nightmares. Imagine coordinating a force that stretched as far as the eye could see. Communication was key, with orders relayed by messengers on horseback, a far cry from the instant communication we take for granted today. Each move on the battlefield was a calculated risk, with commanders weighing the costs and benefits of every decision. Economic factors played a crucial role in these campaigns. War wasn't just about glory. It was a way to secure resources and trade routes. The Persians understood that controlling the Mediterranean trade routes meant wealth and power. By expanding their empire, they ensured a steady flow of goods and tributes, which kept their massive army fed and equipped. But this came at a price. The cost of maintaining such a vast military machine was astronomical, and the empire had to constantly expand to keep the coffers full. And here's the kicker. Despite their might, Persian victories were never guaranteed. The empire's expansion was a double-edged sword. The larger it grew, the more difficult it became to defend. The famous Persian wars against the Greeks showed this vulnerability. For all their strength, the Persians found themselves stretched thin, battling not just external enemies, but the logistical and economic strains of holding a diverse empire together. As you wipe the sweat from your brow and keep marching, remember that you're part of a grand experiment, a testament to the heights of human ambition and the limits of human endurance. The Persian army wasn't just a collection of soldiers. It was a living organism, constantly adapting and evolving. It was an empire built on the backs of men like you, who faced the uncertainties of battle with little more than a shield and a prayer. So, next time you hear tales of ancient empires and their glorious conquests, remember the other side of the story. The side where soldiers battled not just enemy forces, but the very elements that conspired against them. The side where the line between victory and defeat was as thin as a sword's edge. You, a soldier in the Persian army, are part of this storied legacy, a legacy that continues to capture imaginations long after the last spear was thrown. And as you prepare for the battles ahead, take solace in knowing that your struggles and triumphs are etched into the annals of history, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who came before you. The sun dips below the horizon, and as the fiery sky cools to twilight, you find yourself reflecting on the life you've chosen, or perhaps the life that's chosen you. Serving in the Persian army isn't just fighting battles. It's navigating a complex web of social and cultural dynamics that stretch beyond the battlefield. The Persian Empire, after all, isn't just a sprawling expanse of land and power. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads of human experience. Let's start with Zoroastrianism, the spiritual backbone of the empire. Before you roll your eyes at the mention of ancient religion, hear me out. Zoroastrianism wasn't just about worshipping Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. It was a moral compass guiding military conduct. Imagine a creed that emphasized truth, order, and the cosmic struggle against chaos, not unlike your everyday battle, but with a metaphysical twist. It instilled a sense of duty and righteousness, which, if you're marching into potential oblivion, isn't the worst mindset to have. The soldiers were not just fighting for territory, but for cosmic justice, making every skirmish a mini Armageddon. You could call it the world's first motivational poster, sans the cat hanging on a branch. Now, let's talk diversity, a buzzword that modern HR departments love to splash across recruitment brochures. The Persian army was a real-life melting pot long before the phrase became a cliché, with soldiers hailing from every corner of the empire, from the lush valleys of Media to the dusty plains of Mesopotamia. The army was a linguistic and cultural smorgasbord. It was like the United Nations, but with more spears and fewer resolutions. This diversity was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought a wealth of experience and tactics. On the other, it was a nightmare for communication. Yet the Persians embraced it, creating a multi-ethnic force that could adapt to any challenge. Forget the Tower of Babel. This was the ultimate test in teamwork and tolerance. And here's the kicker. This integration wasn't just about convenience or necessity. It was a deliberate strategy. By incorporating different peoples into the ranks, the Persians ensured loyalty and minimized rebellion. Think of it as the ancient world's take on onboarding. Serving in the army meant you were part of something larger than your local clan. You were a cog in the grand imperial machine. And let's be honest, it's hard to revolt against an empire when your brothers in arms hail from the same lands you might otherwise be conspiring with. So, why does any of this matter today? Why should we care about a bunch of ancient soldiers and their cosmic battles? Because the Persian Empire's legacy is all around us, from the administrative practices it perfected to the cultural exchanges it facilitated. The Persians were pioneers of governance, inventing systems of satrapies, or provinces, that allowed them to manage vast territories with remarkable efficiency. Their postal system was a marvel of the age, and their roads were not just paths for armies, but arteries of commerce and communication. They were the original globalists, creating a connected world long before the internet made it fashionable. Their military prowess, too, left an indelible mark. The Greeks may have won the Persian Wars, but it was the Persians who set the stage for what military dominance could achieve. They demonstrated that an empire wasn't just about conquest, but about maintaining and integrating diverse peoples under a single banner. As you sit by the campfire, weary and contemplative, you're part of a legacy that echoes through history, a reminder that the past is not just a series of dusty annals, but a living narrative that shapes our world today. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Despite the grandeur, being a Persian soldier was often a thankless endeavor. Your reward wasn't in coin or comfort, but in the knowledge that you were part of something monumental. It was a life of hardship and sacrifice, with glory often reserved for the annals of history rather than the reality of a soldier's life. Yet, it's precisely this blend of myth and reality that captivates us. The romanticized vision of noble warriors and mighty empires continues to inspire, even as the gritty truths remind us of the human cost behind the legends. As the stars emerge one by one, consider this. The Persian Empire's story is a testament to the enduring spirit of human ambition, the relentless drive to build and conquer, and the eternal struggle to find meaning in conflict. It's a story of power and fragility, of unity and diversity, of triumphs and tribulations. And you, dear soldier, are a part of this grand narrative, a story that, for all its dust and decay, still resonates with the echoes of ancient footsteps marching through the corridors of time. So as you wrap yourself in your cloak, weary from the day's toils, but warmed by the camaraderie of your fellow soldiers, remember that you're not just a nameless figure in history's tapestry. You're a thread in the fabric of an empire that dared to dream big, an empire that, for all its flaws, left a legacy that's still worth telling today. And as you drift off to sleep, with the distant murmur of your comrades and the flickering glow of the dying fire, you carry with you the knowledge that you're part of something both ephemeral and eternal, an epic that, despite the centuries, continues to unfold with every retelling. A long, long time ago in a place not so far away, well, if you're in the Middle East, there was a little city-state named Asher. You might say Asher was like that kid in school with a lot of potential, but a habit of eating glue in the back of the classroom. Located along the Tigris River, Asher had a prime piece of real estate, strategically perfect for anyone interested in commerce. conquest, or just a quiet riverside view. But before it became the center of an empire that could make even Rome clutch its laurels, Ashur had its fair share of growing pains. The Assyrian Empire didn't start off as an all-powerful juggernaut. It was more like a scrappy underdog with a penchant for brutal efficiency. The main allure of Ashur's location was its proximity to trade routes, like being right next to a freeway rest stop, but with more camels and fewer overpriced snacks. This city-state was the launch pad for what would become a series of expansionist campaigns, each more ambitious than the last, led by a succession of kings who were equal parts military genius and PR mastermind. Now, let's talk about those early kings. Take Shamshi-Adad I. He ruled around 1809 to 1776 BCE and was kind of like the Steve Jobs of his time, minus the turtleneck sweater. Shamshi-Adad didn't just sit around waiting for success to land in his lap. He embarked on a series of conquests, extending his influence over northern Mesopotamia. And by influence, I mean he took over cities like Mari and Eshnunna, bringing them under Assyrian control with a combination of military might and the ancient version of smooth-talking diplomacy. But conquering wasn't just about swinging swords and taking names. Oh no, Shamshi-Adad understood the value of image. He was all about that ancient PR, ensuring that his victories were not just military triumphs, but also narratives spun to elevate his status. He commissioned grand inscriptions, like the one where he is described as the king who enlarged the land of Ashur, who subdued the extensive regions of the world, which, if you think about it, is the ancient equivalent of a motivational LinkedIn update. However, the Assyrian Empire's rise wasn't without its hiccups. The geography that made Ashur so attractive also meant it was a juicy target for other power-hungry neighbors. The early Assyrians faced constant pressures from the surrounding tribes and city-states, each with their own agendas, like a cutthroat episode of Survivor, but with more axes and fewer immunity challenges. Plus, the Tigris River, while great for trade, was also prone to flooding, which meant that building a stable economy was a bit like trying to manage a lemonade stand in a hurricane. These challenges forced the early Assyrian kings to be as much shrewd politicians as they were warriors. They had to balance aggression with diplomacy, forming alliances one day and breaking them the next, because trust in the ancient world was about as reliable as a politician's promise. For every city they conquered, there were others that slipped through their grasp, reminding them that the road to empire was paved with both victories and setbacks. Yet even as they struggled, the Assyrians were setting the stage for something bigger. Their relentless push for expansion wasn't just about territorial gain, but about securing vital resources and trade routes. They knew that controlling the movement of goods, and let's face it, the occasional plunder, was key to maintaining power. The Assyrians weren't just warriors, were canny economists who understood that an empire runs on grain, not just glory. So, while the early years of the Assyrian Empire might not have been a smooth ride, they were certainly eventful. Each challenge faced, and each battle fought added another layer to the empire's burgeoning identity. And as Ashur slowly grew from that humble city-state into the heart of a mighty empire, the world began to take notice. From the humble banks of the Tigris, the Assyrians were poised to rise, driven by a potent mix of ambition, strategy, and just a touch of ruthlessness. All they needed was the right opportunity, and perhaps a really good battle cry. Now, if you're thinking that the Assyrians were just a bunch of overzealous geography enthusiasts, you'd be right. But hold your horses. It wasn't all maps and ambitions. To build their empire, they needed a military machine so formidable that it would make even the most seasoned general gulp nervously into his morning ale. Enter the Assyrian war machine, a juggernaut of innovation, brutality, and surprise, logistics. Forget the romanticized warrior image. These guys were the ancient equivalent of a military-industrial complex. Let's start with their innovative tactics. The Assyrians were like the Steve Jobs of warfare, constantly looking to upgrade their arsenal. Around 900 BCE, they became one of the first armies to use iron weapons extensively. Iron, unlike bronze, was tougher and cheaper. Think of it as the ancient version of upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone. Suddenly, everyone else's tech looked woefully outdated. This gave the Assyrians a significant edge on the battlefield, allowing them to slice through enemy lines like a hot knife through butter, or perhaps like a well-crafted iron sword through an underarmed peasant. But it wasn't just about the weapons. The Assyrians were tactical geniuses, employing a variety of formations and strategies that would leave their enemies scratching their heads, or whatever was left of them after an Assyrian encounter. They used chariots as mobile command centers, a bit like ancient tanks, to lead charges and break enemy lines. Their cavalry, trained to perfection, could execute complex maneuvers that would make a synchronized swimming team blush. Then there were the sappers, soldiers trained specifically to undermine enemy walls. These guys would dig tunnels under fortifications, collapse them, and send enemy defenses crumbling. It was like a surprise basement renovation, but instead of new flooring, you got an army pouring through the rubble. And let's not forget their psychological warfare tactics. These guys were the OGs of intimidation, using siege tactics and brutal displays to convince enemy cities that surrender was the better part of valor. Now, about the life of an Assyrian soldier. You might think these warriors were living the dream, glory, honor, and maybe a couple of extra rations. In reality, it was less 300 and more the artist meets survivor. The Assyrian army was a melting pot of conscripts, mercenaries, and professional soldiers, each with their own reasons for being there, ranging from patriotism to the more pragmatic, I need to eat. The conditions were rough. Marching endless miles across the scorching Mesopotamian plains with nothing but the occasional fig for sustenance wasn't anyone's idea of a good time. And while their iron weapons were state-of-the-art, the armor was heavy and the weather unforgiving. Imagine wearing a sauna suit while jogging through a desert. Now add a sword and some hostile neighbors. Not exactly the glamorous image of a warrior poet, is it? But here's the kicker. The Assyrian soldiers weren't just fighting for spoils or glory. They were part of a grand strategy of relentless expansion. You see, the Assyrian Empire operated on a simple principle: keep conquering or get conquered. Their economy relied heavily on tribute from subjugated lands, so expansion wasn't just a goal, it was a necessity. They needed fresh lands to plunder, new people to tax, and more resources to fuel their ever-growing empire. The Assyrian kings understood this all too well. Take Tiglath-Pileser III, who ruled from 745 to 727 BCE. This guy was the Michael Jordan of Assyrian kings, leading his army to numerous victories and expanding the empire to unprecedented heights. He reorganized the military, creating a standing army that was always ready to pounce. He also introduced a provincial system that ensured conquered territories were integrated into the empire, providing a steady stream of resources and soldiers. It was a bit like turning conquered lands into franchise locations, each paying their dues to the Assyrian HQ. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Assyrian conquest strategy was brutal, often involving mass deportations and harsh reprisals against rebellious regions. It was less about winning hearts and minds, and more about making sure there were fewer hearts and minds to worry about in the first place. The Assyrians were masters of the carrot and stick approach, except their version involved more sticks and fewer carrots. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, their brutality, the Assyrians managed to create an empire that, at its peak, stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Their military prowess and relentless expansion made them one of the most feared powers of the ancient world. They were like the sharks of Mesopotamia, always moving forward, always hungry for more. So, while the legend of the Assyrian warrior might conjure images of noble knights in shining armor, the reality was grittier and far more complex. These were soldiers who fought not just for empire, but for survival, part of a machine that was as ruthless as it was effective. It was a world where the line between conqueror and conquered was razor-thin, and where the only certainty was that the Assyrian war machine would roll on, unstoppable and ever hungry for new lands to claim. As we continue to dig into the grit and glory of the Assyrian Empire, remember this. Behind every legend is a reality that's often messier but infinitely more fascinating. And for the Assyrians, that reality was a blend of innovation, brutality, and the relentless push for survival in a world that was both their playground and their battlefield. Stay tuned as we unravel more about this empire that carved its name into the annals of history with iron and ambition. But before you start imagining the Assyrians as the ultimate road warriors of ancient Mesopotamia, let's hit the brakes and take a closer look at the gears that kept their empire running smoothly, or as smoothly as any empire fueled by conquest and coercion can run. While it might be tempting to think that the Assyrians just stomped around the ancient world like a kid in a puddle, splashing everyone with their military might, the reality was a bit more nuanced. Spoiler alert, they had more than a few tricks up their sleeves when it came to diplomacy and economics. First off, let's talk about diplomacy, which in the ancient world was less about shaking hands and more about figuring out how to shake down your neighbors without them realizing it. The Assyrians were experts at this, using their military reputation as a bargaining chip. Picture it. When a delegation from a smaller city-state saw an Assyrian envoy rolling into town, they probably didn't think, oh great, maybe they brought cookies. It was more like, oh, what do they want? And how much is it going to cost us? The Assyrians were masters of what you might call aggressive diplomacy, which is a bit like trying to negotiate with a bear while waving a stake in its face. They leveraged their formidable army to extract tribute from neighboring states, creating a vast network of client kingdoms that were more or less forced into agreeing that, yes, indeed, the Assyrians were the coolest kids on the block. And by tribute, we're not talking about a few bushels of barley. Oh no, we're talking hefty payments that could include anything from gold and silver to livestock and even people. Essentially, the Assyrians perfected the ancient version of the protection racket, pay up or else. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the tribute system. When the Assyrians weren't busy thinking up new ways to intimidate their neighbors, they were busy collecting their dues. The tribute system was like the ultimate subscription service. Only, instead of streaming your favorite shows, you were avoiding getting your city razed to the ground. This system was a financial gold mine for the Assyrians, bolstering their economy and funding their military exploits. By the time of Ashurbanipal, around 669 to 631 BCE, the tribute rolling in was so substantial that it allowed for the construction of the magnificent library at Nineveh, filled with clay tablets that would make any bookworm swoon. But why stop at shaking down your neighbors when you can also control trade routes? The Assyrians were all about that trade life, understanding that controlling the movement of goods was like having a monopoly on the ancient Silk Road. Their empire sprawled across critical trade routes, connecting the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, effectively making them the gatekeepers of commerce. They didn't just want to be the biggest bully in the sandbox. They wanted to own the sandbox and charge everyone else for the privilege of using it. To keep the goods flowing, the Assyrians developed an impressive network of roads. These weren't your modern-day highways with rest stops and fast food. They were more like glorified dirt tracks. Yet for their time, they were marvels of engineering, facilitating the rapid movement of armies and trade caravans alike. The Royal Road, stretching over 500 miles, was the ancient world's version of Route 66, except with fewer diners and more danger of getting speared by a bandit. Speaking of economics, let's not forget the bureaucracy needed to keep this whole operation afloat. The Assyrians established a complex administrative system to manage their empire, staffed by officials who were part accountant, part enforcer. These guys were the unsung heroes, or perhaps villains, of the Assyrian story, making sure that every shekel was counted and every rebellious whisper was noted. It was like running a multinational corporation, but instead of quarterly reports, you had clay tablets, and instead of HR, you had a legion of soldiers ready to enforce compliance. Now, let's bust a few myths while we're here, shall we? The idea that the Assyrians were just a bunch of war-hungry despots who cared only for conquest is a bit like saying pirates were just misunderstood sailors with a fondness for parrots. Sure, they were ruthless, but they were also shrewd operators who understood that an empire isn't built on brute force alone. They knew how to wield power with a combination of fear and incentives, ensuring that their empire was not only feared, but also economically viable. And here's a quotable nugget for you. The Assyrians weren't just in the business of breaking cities. They were in the business of building an empire, and that takes more than just swords and spears. It takes a keen understanding of economics, the ability to manipulate trade, and the kind of diplomacy that could make even the savviest modern politician take notes. So, while the romantic image of the Assyrian warrior charging into battle with iron sword raised high might be what grabs the headlines, it's the less glamorous, but equally vital, story of their economic and diplomatic maneuvers that ensured the empire's longevity. Every tribute extracted, every trade route controlled, and every alliance forged or broken was a thread in the intricate tapestry of Assyrian power. As we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient powerhouse, remember that the Assyrians were not just conquerors. They were architects of a complex, multifaceted empire. And while their methods were often brutal, they were always calculated. So next time you think about the Assyrians, picture not just the warrior, but the diplomat and the economist, all working in concert to maintain and expand one of history's most formidable empires. Stay tuned, because there's a lot more to uncover in this saga of ambition, power, and survival. Now, brace yourself, because we're diving headfirst into the story of the Assyrian Empire's cultural brainchild, the Library of Ashurbanipal. Think of it as the Google of ancient Mesopotamia, albeit with a lot more clay tablets and a lot less digital convenience. Ashurbanipal, the last mighty king of the Assyrian Empire, reigned from 668 to 627 BCE and had a penchant for collecting knowledge as fervently as his ancestors collected cities. Ashurbanipal's library, found in the city of Nineveh, was a cultural behemoth, containing over 30,000 clay tablets. That's right, folks, talking about a staggering collection of texts covering everything from epic literature and science to administrative records. It was like the Library of Congress, but with more dirt under your fingernails and less air conditioning. The most famous text housed here, the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale as old as time, or at least as old as Mesopotamian time. Now, let's not pretend Ashurbanipal was just some benign bookworm king curled up with a tablet by the fire. No, sir, he was a warrior scholar, a rare breed who could order a siege in the morning and catalogue a collection by afternoon. His library was a strategic move, a cultural flex meant to demonstrate Assyria's superiority, not just through military might, but intellectual dominance. By preserving knowledge, he was effectively saying, we're not just good at conquering, we're also the smartest kids in the room. But here's the kicker. While Ashurbanipal was busy collecting wisdom, his empire was busy collecting enemies. You see, maintaining control over such a sprawling empire was no easy feat. It was like trying to keep a dozen cats in a row. Sure, you can try, but it's mostly chaos with a lot of hissing. The Assyrians used a combination of administrative shrewdness and good old fear to keep their subjects in line. They divided the empire into provinces, each governed by an appointed official who reported directly back to the king. It was like a well-oiled machine, or at least as well-oiled as anything could be in the ancient Near East. These officials were tasked with ensuring that taxes were collected, laws were enforced, and any hint of rebellion was squashed faster than you could say insurrection. And believe me, rebellion was a recurring theme in Assyria's story. It's hard to keep everyone happy, and your empire's motto could be summed up as join us, or else. But the Assyrians weren't just about the stick. They offered a few carrots too. Conquered peoples could maintain their own local customs and guards, so long as they paid their taxes and didn't revolt, of course. Now, let's talk numbers. The Assyrian Empire stretched over 540,000 square miles at its peak, covering parts of modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, among others. That's a lot of ground to cover, especially when horseback was your fastest mode of transportation. The Royal Road, that ancient predecessor to modern highways, was crucial for maintaining communication across this vast territory. Messengers could travel from one end of the empire to the other in about a week, a logistical marvel akin to sending a text message back then, but with more dust and less convenience. Despite their administrative prowess, the Assyrians couldn't shake off their reputation for brutality. Remember, these were the folks who perfected the art of psychological warfare. They didn't just conquer, they made examples. Rebellious cities weren't merely defeated, they were obliterated, their populations often deported or worse. The deportation policy served dual purposes. It reduced the chance of further rebellion and spread Assyrian culture far and wide. It was cultural diffusion by force, a bit like a school field trip, but with more trauma. Yet, for all their harshness, the Assyrians contributed significantly to the cultural and intellectual fabric of the ancient world. They were pioneers in the fields of astronomy and medicine, cataloging celestial events and developing early forms of surgery. Their scribes documented everything from omens to treaties, leaving a legacy of knowledge that would influence cultures for centuries. They They also compiled one of the earliest law codes, which, while not as famous as Hammurabi's, was nonetheless a critical step in the development of legal systems. And so, here we are, stuck in this fascinating paradox, an empire known for its savagery, yet also for its scholarly pursuits. The Assyrians remind us that history isn't just about heroes and villains. It's about complex societies that could build libraries while tearing down walls. It's a lesson in duality, a reminder that the same hands that scribed the Epic of Gilgamesh could wield a sword with equal skill. As we wrap this segment, keep in mind that the Assyrian Empire was a mosaic of contradictions. They were architects of destruction and preservers of knowledge. While their methods were often brutal, their impact was undeniably profound, shaping the ancient world in ways that reverberate even today. So, next time you hear someone wax poetic about the Assyrians as mere warmongers, you can chime in with a little historical nuance. After all, behind every great empire lies a story far richer than its reputation. And with that, stay tuned for the next chapter in the saga of the Assyrian Empire, because we're not quite done yet. There's more grit, glory, and a few surprises left in this tale of ancient ambition. And now, the epic saga of the Assyrian Empire takes a turn worthy of an ancient soap opera. Just as it seemed they had it all figured out, conquer, collect, and catalogue, their empire started unraveling faster than a cheap toga in a rainstorm. Picture this. The year is 627 BCE, and Ashurbanipal, the Scala warrior king, has shuffled off this mortal coil. What follows is a power vacuum so deep you could lose a chariot in it. With the big man gone, the empire was like a high-stakes game of musical chairs, only with more knives and fewer tunes. Let's talk key battles and internal strife, because what's a good downfall story without some juicy conflict? The Battle of Nineveh in 612 BCE was a blockbuster of ancient warfare. This was the Marvel movie of its time, featuring a coalition of Medes, Babylonians, and Scythians who all decided they'd had enough of Assyria's antics. They united like a band of unlikely heroes to lay siege to Nineveh, the beating heart of the empire. The city, once a cultural and administrative marvel, was reduced to a smouldering ruin. It was as if the Assyrian Empire had built its grand library only to see the world itself rewrite their ending. But wait, there's more. Meanwhile, in the Western Territories, the Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik was making moves like a chess master, seizing control of Assyrian territories in the Levant. This wasn't just a case of being kicked while down. It was a full-on, kingdom-wide pylon. The Assyrians, once feared for their military might, found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The empire that had once stretched over 540,000 square miles was crumbling, and it turns out, maintaining an empire of that size was a logistical nightmare akin to herding cats in a thunderstorm. So, what went wrong? Well, a series of missteps, for starters. The Assyrians had always been adept at using fear as a political tool, but fear is a volatile currency. It turns out that ruling through terror makes for a shaky foundation when the winds change. The moment their enemies caught a whiff of weakness, the knives came out. Plus, the constant warring and heavy reliance on tribute had overextended their resources. Think of it as maxing out your credit cards in an ancient economy where the interest rates were paid in blood and rebellion. Another fatal flaw in the Assyrian strategy was their inability to foster any sort of long-term loyalty among their subjects. Sure, they were good at making people obey, but admiration, not so much. Their penchant for mass deportations and harsh reprisals made them about as popular as a tax collector at a birthday party. And let's not forget those internal power struggles. With Ashurbanipal gone, the throne became a hot potato, passing rapidly between leaders who were more concerned with personal power than stabilizing the empire. It was like Game of Thrones, but with more clay tablets and fewer dragons. Now, let's delve into the external pressures. The rise of the Babylonians under Nabopolassar was a game-changer. Nabopolassar, who ascended the Babylonian throne around 626 BCE, was not content being just another tributary king. He had ambitions of his own, and he wasn't shy about rallying the troops to take on the Assyrians. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, would later become famous for his own architectural wonders, but that's a tale for another time. For now, the Babylonians were like the scrappy underdogs in a sports drama, taking on the reigning champs and, spoiler alert, winning. Speaking of spoilers, let's not overlook the environmental factors. The Assyrian heartland, centered around the Tigris River, was fertile but prone to unpredictable flooding. These natural disasters could wipe out crops and destabilize the economy faster than you can say agricultural crisis. It was a reminder that while the Assyrians could conquer cities, they couldn't conquer nature. And as history has shown us time and again, an empire's strength is only as enduring as its ability to feed and fund itself. In the end, the Assyrian Empire fell, not with a bang, but with a whimper, a cautionary tale of overreach and hubris. Their grand cities, once bustling with activity, became eerie reminders of a bygone era. Yet their legacy persisted, like echoes in a canyon. The Assyrians had set the stage for future empires, leaving behind innovations in administration and warfare that others would build upon. They were the blueprint for what was to come, a testament to the dual nature of power, capable of creating wonders and simultaneously its own downfall. So, what can modern societies learn from the rise and fall of the Assyrian Empire? For starters, perhaps it's a good idea to balance ambition with prudence. The Assyrians were remarkable in their ability to innovate and expand, but they forgot that an empire built on fear is standing on shaky ground. It's a reminder that diplomacy, economic stability, and a touch of humility can go a long way in ensuring longevity. After all, history has a funny way of repeating itself, and those who fail to learn from it are doomed to repeat the mistakes of their predecessors. As we close the book on the Assyrian Empire, let's remember them not just as the conquerors who ruled with an iron fist, but also as the complex, multifaceted society that they were. They were warriors and scholars, tyrants and innovators. And in their story, we find a microcosm of the human condition, our capacity for both creation and destruction. So, next time you ponder the rise and fall of empires, think of the Assyrians and ask yourself, what legacy will we leave behind, and will it endure the test of time?